Chapter 1. The Poison Trade. Superior Glokta stood in the hall and waited. He stretched his twisted neck out to one side and then to the other, hearing the familiar clicks, feeling the familiar cords of pain stretching out through the tangled muscles between his shoulder blades. Why do I do it when it always hurts me? Why must we test the pain, tongue the ulcer, rub the blister, pick the scab? Well, he snapped. The marble bust at the foot of the stairs offered only its silent contempt, and I get more than enough of that already. Glokta shuffled away, his useless foot scraping over the tiles behind him, the tapping of his cane echoing amongst the moldings on the faraway ceiling. When it came to the great nobleman on the open council, Lord Ingolstadt, the owner of this oversized hall, was an undersized man indeed, the head of a family whose fortunes had declined with the passing years, whose wealth and influence had shriveled to almost nothing. And the more shriveled the man, the more swollen his pretensions must become. Why do they never realize? Small things only seem smaller in large spaces. Somewhere in the shadows, a clock vomited up a few sluggish chimes. Good and late already. The more shriveled the man, the longer the wait on his pleasure. But I can be patient when I must. I have no dazzling banquets, no ecstatic crowds, no beautiful women waiting breathlessly for my arrival, after all. Not anymore. The Gurkish saw to that, in the darkness beneath the Emperor's prisons. He pressed his tongue into his empty gums and grunted as he shifted his leg, needles from it shooting up his back and making his eyelid flicker. I can be patient. The one good thing about every step being an ordeal, you soon learn how to tread carefully. The door beside him opened sharply and Glokta snapped his head round, doing his best to hide a grimace as his neck bones crunched. Lord Ingolstadt stood in the doorway, a big, fatherly man with a ruddy complexion. He offered up a friendly smile as he beckoned Glokta into the room, quite as though this were a social call, and a welcome one at that. I must apologize for keeping you waiting, Superior. I have had so many visitors since I arrived in Adua. My head is in quite a spin. Let us hope it doesn't spin right off. So very many visitors. Visitors with offers, no doubt. Offers for your vote. Offers for your help in choosing our next king. But my offer, I think, you will find painful to refuse. Will you take wine, Superior? No, my lord, thank you. Glokta hobbled over the threshold. I will not stay long. I, too, have a great deal of business to attend to. Elections don't rig themselves, you know. Of course. Please be seated. Ingolstadt dropped happily into one of his chairs and gestured to another. It took Glokta a moment to get settled, lowering himself carefully, then shifting his hips until he discovered a position in which his back did not give him constant pain. And what did you wish to discuss with me? I have come on behalf of Archlector Salt. I hope you will not be offended if I am blunt, but His Eminence wants your vote. The nobleman's heavy features twisted in feigned puzzlement. Very badly feigned as it goes. I am not sure that I understand. My vote on what issue? Glokta wiped some wet from beneath his leaking eye. Must we engage in such undignified dancing? You have not the build for it, and I have not the legs. On the issue of who will next occupy the throne, Lord Ingolstadt. Ah. That. Yes, that. Idiot. Superior Glokta, I hope I will not disappoint you or His Eminence, a man for whom I have nothing but the highest respect. And he bowed his head with an exaggerated show of humility. When I say that I could not, in all good conscience, allow myself to be influenced in any one direction, I feel that I, and all the members of the Open Council, have been given a sacred trust. I am duty-bound to vote for the man who seems to me to be the very finest candidate from the many excellent men available, and he assumed a grin of the greatest self-satisfaction. A fine speech. A village dunce might have even believed it. How often have I heard it, or its like, the past few weeks? Traditionally, the bargaining would come next. The discussion of how much, exactly, a sacred trust is worth. How much silver outweighs a good conscience, how much gold cuts through the bindings of duty. But I am not in a bargaining mood today. Glokta raised his eyebrows very high. I must congratulate you on a noble stand, Lord Ingolstadt. If everyone had your character, we would be living in a better world. A noble stand indeed. Especially when you have so much to lose. No less than everything, I suppose. He winced as he took his cane in one hand and rocked himself painfully forward towards the edge of the chair. But I see you will not be swayed. And so I take my leave. What can you refer to? Superior. The nobleman's unease was written plainly across his plump face. Why, Lord Ingolstadt, to your corrupt business dealings? The ruddy cheeks had lost much of their glow. There must be some mistake. Oh, no, I assure you. Glokta slid the papers of confession from the inside pocket of his coat. You are mentioned often in the confessions of senior mercers, you see, very often, and he held the crackling pages out so they both could see them. Here you are referred to as, and not my choice of words, you understand, an accomplice. Here as the prime beneficiary of a most unsavory smuggling operation. And here, you will note, and I almost blush to mention it, your name and the word treason appear in close proximity. Ingolstadt sagged back into his chair and set his glass rattling down on the table beside him, a quantity of wine sloshing out onto the polished wood. Oh, we really should wipe that up. It could leave an awful stain, and some stains are impossible to remove. His Eminence, continued Glokta, counting you as a friend, was able to keep your name out of the initial inquiries for everybody's sake. He understands that you were merely trying to reverse the failing fortunes of your family, and is not without sympathy. If you were to disappoint him in this business of votes, however, his sympathy would be quickly exhausted. Do you take my meaning? I feel that I have made it abundantly clear. I do, croaked Ingolstadt. And the bonds of duty, do they feel any looser now? The nobleman swallowed. The flush quite vanished from his face. I am eager to assist His Eminence in any way possible, of course. But the thing is, what now? A desperate offer? A despairing bribe? An appeal to my conscience, even? A representative of High Justice Morovia came to me yesterday, a man called Harlan Morrow. He made very similar representations, and not dissimilar threats. Glokta frowned. Did he now? Morovia and his little worm? Always just one step ahead, or just one step behind, but never far away. A shrill note crept into Ingolstadt's voice. What am I to do? I cannot support you both. I will leave Adua, Superior, and never return. I will abstain from voting. You'll do no such fucking thing, hissed Glokta. You'll vote the way I tell you, and Morovia be damned. More prodding. Distasteful, but so be it. Are my hands not filthy to the elbow? Rummaging through another sewer or two will scarcely make the difference. He let his voice soften to an oily purr. I observed your daughters in the park yesterday. The nobleman's face lost its last vestige of color. 3 young innocents on the very cusp of womanhood, dressed all in the height of fashion, and each one lovelier than the last. The youngest would be 15, 13, croaked Ingolstadt. Ah, and Glokta let his lips curl back to display his toothless smile. She blooms early. They have never before visited Adua. Am I correct? They have not, he nearly whispered. I thought not. Their excitement and delight as they toured the gardens of the Agrient were perfectly charming. I swear, they must have caught the eye of every eligible suitor in the capital. It would break my heart, Lord Ingolstadt, to see 3 such delicate creatures snatched suddenly away to one of England's harshest penal institutions, places where beauty and breeding and a gentle disposition attract an entirely different and far less enjoyable kind of attention. Glokta gave a carefully orchestrated shudder of dismay as he leaned slowly forward to whisper, I would not wish that life on a dog, and all on account of the indiscretions of a father who had the means of reparation well within his grasp. But my daughters, they were not involved. We are electing a new king. We are electing a new king? Everyone is involved. Harsh, perhaps. But harsh times demand harsh actions. Glokta struggled to his feet, hand wobbling on his cane with the effort. I will tell His Eminence that he can count on your vote. Ingolstadt collapsed, suddenly and completely, like a stabbed wineskin. His shoulders sagged. His face hung loose with horror and hopelessness. But the High Justice, he whispered. Have you no pity? Glokta could only shrug. I did have. As a boy I was soft-hearted beyond the point of foolishness. I swear I would cry at a fly caught in a spider's web. He grimaced at a brutal spasm through his leg as he turned for the door. Constant pain has cured me of that. It was an intimate little gathering, but the company hardly inspires warmth. Superior Goyle glared at Glokta from across the huge round table in the huge round office, his beady eyes staring from his bony face. And not with tender feelings, I rather think. The attention of His Eminence, the Archlector, the head of His Majesty's Inquisition, was fixed elsewhere, pinned to the curving wall, taking up perhaps half of the entire chamber, were 320 sheets of paper, one for every great heart on our noble open council. They crackled gently in the breeze from the great windows, fluttering little papers for fluttering little votes. Each one was marked with a name. Lord this, Lord that, Lord someone of wherever. Big men and little men, men whose opinions on the whole no one cared a damn for until Prince Reynaud fell out of his bed and into his grave. Many of the pages had a blob of colored wax on their corner. Some had 2, or even 3, allegiances. Which way will they vote? Blue for Lord Brock, red for Lord Isher, black for Morovia, white for Sult, and so on. All subject to change, of course, depending which way the wind blows them. Below were written lines of small, dense script, too small for Glokta to read from where he was sitting, but he knew what they said. Wife was once a whore, partial to young men, drinks too much for his good, murdered a servant in a rage, gambling debts he cannot cover, secrets, rumors, lies, the tools of this noble trade. 320 names, and just as many sordid little stories, each one to be picked at and dug out and jabbed our way. Politics, truly, the work of the righteous. So why do I do this? Why? The Archlector had more pressing concerns. Brock still leads, he murmured in a dour drone, staring at the shifting papers with his white-gloved hands clasped behind his back. He has some 50 votes, more or less certain as we can be in these uncertain times. Isher is not far behind, with 40 or more to his name. Skald has made some recent gains, as far as we can tell. An unexpectedly ruthless man. He has the Sterikland delegation more or less in his hand, which gives him 30 votes perhaps, and Barizin about the same. They are the 4 main contenders, as things stand. But who knows? Perhaps the king will live another year, and by the time it comes to a vote we'll all have killed each other. Glokta had to stifle a grin at the thought. The Lords Round, heaped with richly dressed corpses, every great nobleman in the Union, and all 12 members of the closed council, each stabbed in the back by the man beside. The ugly truth of government. Did you speak to Hugin? Snapped Sult. Goyle tossed his balding head and sneered at Glokta with seething annoyance. Lord Huygen is still struggling under the delusion that he could be our next king, though he cannot certainly control more than a dozen chairs. He barely had time to hear our offer, he was so busy scrabbling to coax out more votes. Perhaps in a week or 2, he will see reason. Then he might be encouraged to lean our way, but I wouldn't bet on it. More likely he'll throw in his lot with Isher. The 2 of them have always been close, I understand. Good for them, hissed Sult. I presented him with your ultimatum in very blunt terms, Your Eminence. Then we can count on his vote. How to put this? I could not say so with absolute certainty. High Justice Morovia was able to make threats almost identical to our own, through his man Harlan Morrow. Isn't he some lickspittle of Hoff's? It would seem he has moved up in the world, or down, depending on how you look at it. He could be taken care of. Goyle wore a most unsavory expression. Quite easily. No, snapped Sult. Why is it, Goyle, that no sooner does a problem appear than you want to kill it? We must tread carefully for now, and show ourselves to be reasonable men, open to negotiation. He strode to the window, the bright sunlight glittering purple through the great stone on his ring of office. Meanwhile, the business of actually running the country is ignored. Taxes go uncollected. Crimes go unpunished. This bastard they call the tanner, this demagogue, this traitor, speaks in public at village fairs, urging open rebellion. Daily now, peasants leave their farms and turn to banditry, perpetrating untold theft and damage. Chaos spreads, and we have not the resources to stamp it out. There are only 2 regiments of the king's own left in Adua, scarcely enough to maintain order in the city. Who knows if one of our noble lords will tire of waiting and decide to try to seize the crown prematurely. I would not put it past them. Will the army return from the north soon? Asked Goyle. Unlikely. That oaf Marshal Burr has spent 3 months squatting outside Dunbrek and given Bethod ample time to regroup beyond the Whiteflow. Who knows when he'll finally get the job done, if ever? Months spent destroying our own fortress. It almost makes one wish we'd put less effort into building the place. 25 votes. The Archlector scowled at the crackling papers. 25. And Morovia has 18. We're scarcely making progress. For every vote we gain, we lose 1 somewhere else. Goyle leaned forwards in his chair. Perhaps, Your Eminence, the time has come to call again on our friend at the university. The Archlector hissed furiously, and Goyle snapped his mouth shut. Glokta looked out the great window, pretending that he had heard nothing out of the ordinary. The 6 crumbling spires of the university dominated the view. But what help could anyone possibly find there? Amongst the decay and the dust from those old idiots of Adepti, Salt did not give him long to consider it. I will speak to Hugin myself, and he jabbed one of the papers with a finger. Goyle, write to Lord Governor Meade and try to elicit his support. Glokta, arrange an interview with Lord Wetterland. He has yet to declare himself one way or the other. Get out there, the pair of you. Salt turned from his sheets full of secrets and fixed on Glokta with his hard blue eyes. Get out there and get me votes. Chapter 2. Being chief. Cold night, shouted the Dogman. Thought it was meant to be summer. The 3 of them looked up. The nearest was an old man with gray hair and a face that looked like it had seen some weather. Just past him was a younger man, missing his left arm above the elbow. The 3rd was no more'n a boy, stood down the end of the quay and frowning out at the dark sea. Dogman faked a nasty limp as he walked over, dragging one leg behind him and wincing like he was in pain. He shuffled under the lamp, dangling on its high pole the warning bell beside it, and held up the jar so they could all see. The old man grinned and leaned his spear against the wall. Always cold. Down by the water. He came up, rubbing his hands together. Just as well we got you to keep us warm, eh? Aye, good luck all round. Dogman pulled out the stopper and let it dangle, lifted one of the mugs and poured out a slosh. No need to be shy, eh, lad? I guess there ain't at that. Dogman sloshed out some more. The man with one arm had to set his spear down when he got handed his mug. The boy came up last and looked Dogman over, wary. The old one nudged him with an elbow. You sure your mother'd care for you drinking, boy? Who cares what she'd say? He growled, trying to make his high voice sound gruff. Dogman handed him a mug. You're old enough to hold a spear, you're old enough to hold a cup, I reckon. I'm old enough, he snapped, snatching it out of Dogman's hand, but he shuddered when he drank from it. Dogman remembered his first drink, feeling mighty sick and wondering what all the fuss was about, and he smiled to himself. The boy thought he was being laughed at, most likely. Who are you, anyway? The old man tutted. Don't mind him. He's still young enough to think that rudeness wins respect. It's all right, said Dogman, pouring himself a mug, then setting the jar down on the stones, taking time to think out what to say, make sure he didn't make no mistakes. My name's Craig. He'd known a man called Craig once, got killed in a scrap up in the hills. Dogman hadn't liked him much, and he'd no idea why that name came to mind, but one was about as good as another right then, he reckoned. He slapped his thigh. Got poked in the leg up at Dunbrek, and it ain't healed right. Can't march no more. Reckon my days at holding a line are over, so my chief sent me down here to watch the water with you lot. He looked out at the sea, flapping and sparkling under the moon like a thing alive. Can't say I'm too sorry about it, though. Being honest, I had a skin full of fighting. Union are still sat outside their own walls, trying everything to get in, and we're on the other side of the river, waiting for them. Been that way for weeks. I heard some boys have gone over to the Union. I heard old Three Trees was up there, got killed in that battle. He was a great man, Rudd Three Trees, said the old boy. Great man, aye, Dogman nodded. That he was. Heard the Dogman took his place, though, said one arm. That a fact? So I heard. Mean bastard, that. Huge big lad. They call him Dogman 'cause he bit some woman's teats off one time. Dogman blinked. Do they now? Well, and I never saw him. I heard the bloody nine was up there, whispered the boy, eyes big like he was talking about a ghost. The other two snorted at him. The bloody nine's dead, boy, and good riddance to that evil fucker. One Arm shuddered. Damn it, but you get some fool notions. Just what I heard is all. The old man swilled down some more grog and smacked his lips. Don't much matter who's where. You'll most likely get bored once they've got their fort back. Get bored and go home across the sea, and everything back to normal. None of 'em will be coming down here to you, Efrith, anyway. No, no, said One Arm happily. They'll not be coming here. Then why are we out here watching for 'em? Whined the boy. The old man rolled his eyes like he'd heard it 10 times before and always made the same answer. 'Cause that's the task we've been given, lad, and once you got a task, you best do it right. Dogman remembered Logen telling him the same thing, and 3 trees, too. Both gone now and back in the mud, but it was still as true as it ever was, even if it's a dull task or a dangerous or a dark one. Even if it's a task you'd rather not do. Damn it. But he needed to piss. Always did at a time like this. True enough, said the old man, smiling down into his mug. Things have got to get done. That they do. Shame, though. You seem a nice enough set o' lads. And the dogman reached behind his back, just like he was scratching his arse. Shame? The boy looked puzzled. How do you mean a death's in a cell? Nice. Dow came up behind him and cut his neck open. Same moment, almost. Grim's dirty hand clamped down on One Arm's mouth, and the bloody point of a blade slid out the gap in his cloak. Dogman jumped forward and gave the old man 3 quick stabs in the ribs. He wheezed and stumbled, eyes wide, mug still hanging from his hand, groggy drool spilling out his open mouth. Then he fell down. The boy crawled a little way. He had one hand to his neck, trying to keep the blood in, the other reaching out towards the pole the warning bell was hung on. He had some bones, the dogman reckoned, to be thinking of the bell with a slit throat, but he didn't drag himself more in a stride before Dow stomped down hard on the back of his neck and squashed him flat. Dogman winced as he heard the boy's neck bones crunch. He hadn't deserved to die like that, most likely. But that's what war is. A lot of folk getting killed that don't deserve it. The job had needed doing, and they'd done it, and were all 3 still alive. About as much as he could have hoped for from a piece of work like that. But somehow it still left a sour taste on him. He'd never found it easy, but it was harder than ever, now he was chief. Strange how it's that much easier to kill folk when you've got someone telling you to do it. Hard business, killing, harder than you'd think. Unless your name's Black Dow, of course. That bastard would kill a man as easy as he'd take a piss. That was what made him so damn good at it. Dogman watched him bend down, strip the cloak from One Arm's limp body and pull it round his own shoulders, then roll the corpse off into the sea, careless as dumping rubbish. You got 2 arms, said Grim, already with the old man's cloak on. Dow looked down at himself. What are you saying exactly? I ain't cutting my arm off to make for a better disguise, you idiot. He means keep it out o' sight. Dogman watched Dow wipe out a mug with a dirty finger, pour himself a slug and knock it back. How can you drink at a time like this? He asked, pulling the boy's bloody cloak off his corpse. Dow shrugged as he poured himself another. Shame to waste it, and like you said, cold night. He broke a nasty grin. Damn it, but you can talk, Dogman. Name's Craig. He took a couple of limping steps. Stabbed in me arse up at Dunbreck. Where'd you get it from? He slapped Grim's shoulder with the back of his hand. Fucking lovely, eh? They got a word for it, don't they? What's that word now? Plausible, said Grim. Dow's eyes lit up. Plausible. That's what you are, Dogman. You're one plausible bastard. I swear, you could have told him you was scarling hoodless his own self, and they'd have believed it. Don't know how you can keep a straight face. Dogman didn't feel too much like laughing. He didn't like looking at them 2 corpses still laid out on the stones. Kept worrying that the boy'd get cold without his cloak. Damn fool thing to think about, given he was lying in a pool of his own blood astride a cross. Never mind about that, he grunted. Dump these 2 here and get over by the gate. Don't know when there'll be the others coming. Right ya, chief. Right ya. Whatever you say. Dow heaved the 2 of them off into the water. Then he unhooked the clapper from inside the bell and tossed that into the sea for good measure. Shame, said Grim. What is? Waste of a bell. Dow blinked at him. Waste of a bell, I swear. You got yourself a lot to say all of a sudden, and you know what? I think I liked you better before. Waste of a bell. You lost your mind, boy. Grim shrugged. Southerners might want one when they get here. They can fucking take a dive for the clapper then, can't they? And Dow snatched up one-armed spear and strode over to the open gate, one hand stuffed inside his stolen cloak, grumbling to himself. West of a bell by the fucking dead, the Dogman stretched up on his toes and unhooked the lamp, held it up, facing the sea, then he lifted one side of his cloak to cover it, brought it down again, lifted it up, brought it down, one more time, and he hooked it flickering back on the pole. Seemed a tiny little flame right then to warm all their hopes at, a tiny little flame to be seen all the way out there on the water. But the only one they had. He was waiting all the time for the whole business to go wrong, for the clamor to go up in the town, for 6 Carls to come pouring out that open gate and give the 3 of them the killing they deserved. He was bursting to piss, thinking about it. But they didn't come. No sound but the empty bell creaking on its pole, the cold waves slapping on stone and wood. It was just the way they'd planned it. The first boat came gliding out the darkness, Shivers grinning in the prow. A score of Carls were pressed into the boat behind him, working the oars real careful, white faces tensed up, teeth gritted with the effort of keeping quiet. Still, every click and clank of wood and metal set the Dogman's nerves to jumping. Shivers and his boys hung some sacks of straw over the side as they brought the boat in close, stopping the wood scrapping on the stones, all thought out the week before. They tossed up ropes and Dogman and Grim caught 'em, dragged the boat up tight and tied it off. Dogman looked over at Dow, leaning still and easy against the wall by the gate, and he shook his head gently, to say no one was moving in the town. Then Shivers was up the steps, smooth and quiet, squatting down in the darkness. "Nice work, Chief," he whispered, smiling right across his face. "Nice and neat. There'll be time to slap each other's backs later. Get the rest of them boats tied off." "Right y'are." There were more boats coming now, more Carls, more sacks of straw. Shivers' boys pulled them in, started dragging men up onto the quay, all kinds of men who'd come over the last few weeks, men who didn't care for Bethod's new way of doing things. Soon there was a good crowd of them down by the water. So many Dogmen could hardly believe they weren't seen. They formed up into groups, just the way they'd planned, each one with their own chief and their own task. A couple of the lads knew Ufrith, and they'd made a plan of the place in the dirt, the way Three Trees used to. Dogman had every one of 'em learn it. He grinned when he thought of how much Black Dow had carped about that, but it was worth it now. He squatted by the gate, and they came past, one dark and silent group at a time. Tull was first up, a dozen Carls behind him. "All right, Thunderhead," said Dogman. "You got the main gate." "Aye," nodded Tull. "Salt, biggest task o' the lot, so try and get it done quiet. Quiet, you got it. Luck, then Tull won't need it." And the giant hurried off into the dark streets with his crew behind. "Red Hat, you got the tower by the well and the walls beside." "That I have." "Shivers, you and your boys are keeping a watch on the town square." "Like the owl watches, Chief." And so on. Past they went, through the gate and into the dark streets, making no more noise than the wind off the sea and the waves on the dock. Dogman giving each crew their task and slapping him off on their way. Black Dow came up last, and a hard-looking set of men he had behind him. "Dow, you got the headman's haul. Stack it up with some wood, like we said, but don't set fire to it, you hear? Don't kill anyone you don't have to. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Fair enough. And Dow," he turned back, "don't go bother any women folk either." "What do you think I am?" he asked, teeth gleaming in the darkness. Some kind of an animal, and that was it done. There was just him and Grim, and a few others to watch the water. Said Grim, nodding his head slowly. That was high praise indeed from him. Dogman pointed over at the pole. "Get us that bell, would you?" he said. Might have a use for it after all, by the dead. But it made a sound. Dogman had to half close his eyes, his whole arm trembling as he whacked at the bell with the handle of his knife. He didn't feel too comfortable in amongst all those buildings, squashed in by walls and fences. He hadn't spent much time in towns in his life, and what he had spent he hadn't much enjoyed, either burning things and causing mischief after a siege or lying around in Bethod's prisons. waiting to be killed. He blinked round at the jumble of slate roofs, the walls of old grey stone, black wood, dirty grey render, all greasy with the thin rain. Seemed a strange way to live, sleeping in a box, waking all your days in the exact same spot. The idea alone made him restless, as though that bell hadn't got him twitchy enough already. He cleared his throat and set it down on the cobbles beside him. Then he stood there waiting, one hand on the hilt of his sword in a way that he hoped meant business. Some flapping footfalls came from down a street, and a little girl ran out into the square. Her jaw dropped open when she saw them standing there. A dozen men all bearded and armed, Tulduru in their midst. Probably she never saw a man half so big. She turned around sharp to run the other way, almost slipping over on the slick cobbles. Then she saw Dao sitting on a pile of wood just behind her, leaning back easy against the wall, his drawn sword on his knees, and she froze stone still. "That's all right, girl," growled Dao. "You can stay where you are." There were more of them coming now, hurrying down into the square from all around, all getting that same shocked look when they saw that Dogman and his lads stood waiting. Women and boys, mostly, and a couple of old men, dragged out of their beds by the bell and still half asleep, eyes red and faces puffy, clothes tangled, armed with whatever was to hand. A boy with a butcher's cleaver. An old man all stooped over with a sword looked even older than he was. A girl at the front with a pitchfork and a lot of messy dark hair had a look on her face reminded Dogman of Shari. Hard and thoughtful, the way she used to look at him before they started lying together. Dogman frowned down at her dirty bare feet, hoping that he wouldn't have to kill her. Getting them good and scared would be the best way to get things done quick and easy, so Dogman tried to talk like someone to be feared, rather than someone who was shitting himself, like Logen might have talked. Or maybe that was more fear than was needful, like Three Trees then. Tough but fair, wanting what was best for everyone. "The headman among you?" he growled. "I'm him," croaked the old man with the sword, his face all slack with shock at finding a score of well-armed strangers standing in the middle of his town square. "Brass is my name. Who the hell might you be?" "I'm the Dogman, and this here is Harding Grim, and the big lad is Tulduru Thunderhead." Some eyes went wide. Some folk muttered to each other. Seemed they'd heard the names before. "We're here with 500 Carls, and last night we took your city off you." A few gasps and squeals at that. It was closer to 200, but there was no point telling them so. They might have got the notion that fighting was a good idea, and he'd no wish to end up stabbing a woman, or getting stabbed by one either. "There's plenty more of us, roundabout, and your guards are all trussed up, those we didn't have to kill. Some of my boys. And you ought to know I'm talking of Black Dao. That's me." Dao flashed his nasty grin, and a few folk shuffled fearfully away from him like they'd been told hell itself was sat there. Well, they were for putting the torch straight to your houses and getting some killing done. Do things like we used to with the bloody nine in charge, you take my meaning. Some child in amongst the rest started to cry a bit, a wet kind of snuffling. The boy stared round him, cleaver wobbling in his hand. The dark-haired girl blinked and clung on tighter to her pitchfork. "They got the gist, all right, but I thought I'd give you a fair chance to give up, being as the town's full with womenfolk and children and all the rest. My score's with Bethod, not with you people. The Union want to use this place as a port, bring in men and supplies and whatever. They'll be here inside an hour in their ships, a lot of them. It's happening with or without your say-so. I guess my point is we can do this the bloody way, if that's the way you want it. The dead know we've had the practice. Or you can give up your weapons if you've got 'em, and we can all get along. Nice and what's the word for it?" "Civilized," said Grim. "Aye, civilized. What do you say?" The old man fingered his sword, looking like he'd rather have leant on it than swung it, and he stared up at the walls, where a few of the Carls were looking down and his shoulders slumped. "Looks like you got us called. The Dogman, eh? I always heard you was a clever bastard. No one much left here to fight you anyway. Bethod took every man could hold a spear and a shield at once." He looked round at the sorry crowd behind him. "Will you leave the women be? We'll leave 'em be. Those that want to be left be," said Dao, leering at the girl with the pitchfork. "Well, leave 'em be," growled Dogman, giving him a hard look. "I'll see to it. Well then," wheezed the old man, shuffling up and wincing as he knelt and dropped his rusty blade at Dogman's feet. "You're a better man than Bethod, far as I'm concerned. I suppose I ought to be thanking you for your mercy if you keep your word." Dogman didn't feel too merciful. He doubted the old boy he'd killed on the dock would be thanking him, or the one-armed man stabbed through from behind, or the lad with the cut throat who'd had his whole life stolen. One by one, the rest of the crowd came forward, and one by one the weapons, if you could call them that, got dropped in a heap, a pile of old rusty tools and junk. The boy came up last and let his cleaver clatter down with the rest, gave a scared look at Black Dow, then hurried back to the others and clung to the dark-haired girl's hand. They stood there, in a wide-eyed huddle, and Dogman could almost smell their fear. They were waiting for Dow and his carls to set to hacking him down where they stood. They were waiting to get herded in a house and locked in and the place set fire to. Dogman had seen all that before, so he didn't blame them one bit as they all crowded together like sheep pressed up in a field in winter. He'd have done the same. "All right," he barked. "That's it. Back to your houses or whatever. Union'll be here before midday, and it'd be better if the streets were empty." They blinked at Dogman, and at Tull, and at Black Dow, and at each other. They swallowed and trembled, and muttered their thanks to the dead. They broke up slowly and spread out, and went off their own ways, alive to everyone's great relief. "Nicely done, Chief," said Tull in Dogman's ear. Three Trees himself couldn't have done it no better. Dow sidled up from the other side. "About the women, though, if you're asking my opinion, I'm not," said Dogman. "Have you seen my son? There was one woman who wasn't going home. She was coming up from one man to another, half tears in her eyes, and her face all wild from worry." The Dogman put his head down and looked the other way. "My son, he was on guard, down by the water. You seen him?" She tugged at Dogman's coat, her voice cracked and wet-sounding. "Please, where's my son? You think I know where everyone's at," he snapped in her weepy face. He strode away like he had a load of important stuff to do, and all the while he was thinking, "You're a coward, Dogman. You're a bastard bloody coward. Some hero, pulling a neat trick on a bunch of women, children, and old men. It ain't easy being chief." Chapter 3. Noble Business. The great moat had been drained early in the siege, leaving behind a wide ditch full of black mud. At the far end of the bridge, across it 4 soldiers worked by a cart, dragging corpses to the bank and rolling them flopping down to the bottom. The corpses of the last offenders, gashed and burned, spattered with blood and dirt. Wild men, from past the river Crinna far to the east, tangle-haired and bearded, their limp bodies seemed pitifully withered after 3 months sealed up behind the walls of Dunbreck, pitifully starved. Scarcely human. It was hard for West to take much joy in the victory over such sorry creatures as these. "Seems a shame," muttered Jalenholm, after they fought so bravely. "To end like that." West watched another ragged corpse slither down the bank and into the tangled heap of muddy limbs. "This is how most sieges end, especially for the brave. They'll be buried down there in the muck, then the moat will be flooded again. The waters of the White Flow will surge over them, and their bravery, or lack of it, will have meant nothing." The fortress of Dunbreck loomed over the 2 officers as they crossed the bridge, black outlines of walls and towers like great stark holes in the heavy white sky. A few ragged birds circled above. A couple more croaked from the scarred battlements. It had taken General Croy's men a month to make this same journey, bloodily repulsed time and again, and to finally break through the heavy doors under a steady rain of arrows, stones, and boiling water. Another week of claustrophobic slaughter to force the dozen strides down the tunnel beyond, to burst through the second gate with axe and fire, and finally seize control of the outer wall. Every advantage had lain with the defenders. The place had been most carefully designed to ensure that it was so, and once they had made it through the gatehouse, their problems were only just beginning. The inner wall was twice the height and thickness of the outer, dominating its walkways at every point. There had been no shelter from missiles from the 6 monstrous towers. To conquer that second wall, Croy's men had tried every strategy in the manual of siege. They had worked with pick and crowbar, but the masonry was 5 strides thick at the base. They had made an effort at a mine, but the ground was waterlogged outside the fortress and solid England rock beneath. They had bombarded the place with catapults, but scarcely scratched the mighty bastions. They had come with scaling ladders, again and again, in waves and in parties, by surprise at night or brazenly in the day, and in the darkness and the light, The straggling lines of Union wounded had shuffled away from their failed attempts. The dead dragged solemnly behind. They had finally tried reasoning with the wild defenders through the medium of a northern translator, and the unfortunate man had been pelted with night soil. It had been pure fortune in the end. After studying the movements of the guards, one enterprising sergeant had tried his luck with a grapple under cover of night. He had climbed up, and a dozen other brave men had followed him. They took the defenders by surprise, killed several of them, and seized the gatehouse. The whole effort took 10 minutes and cost 1 Union life. It was a fitting irony, to West's mind, that having tried every roundabout method and been bloodily repulsed, the Union army had finally entered the inner fortress by its open front gate. A soldier was bent over near that archway now, being noisily sick onto the stained flagstones. West passed him with some foreboding, the sound of his clicking boot heels echoing around the long tunnel, and emerged into the wide courtyard at the center of the fortress. It was a regular hexagon, echoing the shape of the inner and outer walls, all part of the perfectly symmetrical design. West doubted that the architects would have approved, however, of the state in which the Northmen had left the place. A long wooden building at one side of the yard, perhaps a stables, had caught fire in the attack, and was now reduced to a mass of charred beams, the embers still glowing. Those clearing away the mess had too much work outside the walls, and the ground was still scattered with fallen weapons and tangled corpses. The Union dead had been stretched out in rows near one corner, and covered up with blankets. The Northmen lay in every attitude, on their faces or on their backs, curled up or stretched out where they fell. Beneath the bodies, the stone flags were deeply scored, and not just with the random damage of a 3-month siege. A great circle had been chiseled from the rock, and other circles within it, strange marks and symbols laid out in an intricate design. West did not care for its look in the least. Worse still, he was becoming aware of a repulsive stench to the place, more pungent even than the tang of burned wood. "Whatever is that smell?" muttered Jalenhorm, putting one hand over his mouth. A sergeant nearby overheard him. "Seems that our northern friends chose to decorate the place." He pointed up above their heads, and West followed the gauntleted finger with his eyes. They were so decayed that it took him a moment to realize he was looking at the remains of men. They had been nailed, spread-eagled, to the inside walls of each of the towers, high above the lean-to buildings round the courtyard. Rotting offal hung down from their bellies, crawling with flies, cut with the bloody cross, as the Northmen would say. Tattered shreds of brightly colored Union uniforms were still vaguely visible, fluttering in the breeze among the masses of putrefying flesh. Clearly they had been hanging there some time, since before the siege began, certainly. Perhaps since the fortress first fell to the Northmen. Corpses of the original defenders nailed there, rotting, for all those months. 3 appeared to be without their heads, the companion pieces, perhaps, to those 3 gifts that had been sent to Marshal Burr all that time ago. West found himself wondering, pointlessly, whether any of them had been alive when they were nailed up. Spit rushed into his mouth, the sound of flies buzzing seeming suddenly, sickeningly loud. Jalenhorm had gone pale as a ghost. He did not say anything. He did not have to. "What happened here?" muttered West through his gritted teeth, as much to himself as anything. "Well, sir, we think they were hoping to get help." The sergeant grinned at him, clearly possessed of a very strong stomach. "Help from some unfriendly gods, we've been guessing. Seems that no one was listening down below, though, eh?" West frowned at the ragged markings on the ground. "Get rid of them. Tear up the flags and replace them if you have to." His eyes strayed to the decaying cadavers above, and he felt his stomach give a painful squeeze. "And offer a 10-mark bounty to the man with guts enough to climb up there and cut those corpses down. 10 marks, sir! Bring me over that ladder." West turned and strode out through the open gates of the fortress of Dunbreck, holding his breath and hoping like hell that he never had occasion to visit the place again. He knew that he would be back, though, if only in his dreams. Briefings with Polder and Croy were more than enough to sicken the healthiest of men, and Lord Marshal Burr was by no means in that category. The commander of His Majesty's armies in England was as pitifully shrunken as the defenders of Dunbreck had been, his simple uniform hanging loose around him while his pale skin seemed stretched too tight over the bones. In a dozen short weeks he had aged as many years. His hand shook, his lip trembled. He could not stand for long, and could not ride at all. From time to time, he would grimace and shiver as though he was racked by unseen pangs. West hardly knew how he was able to carry on, but carry on he did, 14 hours a day and more. He attended to his duties with all his old diligence. Only now they seemed to eat him up, piece by piece. Burr frowned grimly up at the great map of the border region, his hands resting on his belly. The white flow was a winding blue line down the middle, Dunbreck a black hexagon marked in swirly script. On its left, the Union. On its right, the North. So, he croaked, then coughed and cleared his throat. The fortress is back in our hands. General Croy gave a stiff nod. It is, finally, observed Polder under his breath. The two generals still appeared to regard Bethod and his Northmen as a minor distraction from the real enemy, each other. Croy bristled, his staff muttering around him like a flock of angry crows. Dunbreck was designed by the Union's foremost military architects, and no expense was spared in its construction. Capturing it has been no mean task. Of course, growled Burr, doing his best to mount a diversion. Damn difficult place to take. Do we have any notion of how the Northmen managed it? None survived to tell us what trickery they employed, sir. They fought, without exception, to the death. The last few barricaded themselves in the stables and set fire to the structure. Burr glanced at West and slowly shook his head. How can one understand such an enemy? What is the condition of the fortress now? The moat was drained, the outer gatehouse partly destroyed, considerable damage done to the inner wall. The defenders tore down some buildings for wood to burn and stones to throw, and left the rest in. Croy worked his lips as though struggling to find the words. A very poor condition. Repairs will take some weeks. Huh? Burr rubbed unhappily at his stomach. The closed council are anxious that we cross the white flow into the north as soon as possible, and take the fight to the enemy. Positive news for the restless populace, and so on. The capture of Ufrith, leapt in Polder with a grin of towering smugness, has left our position far stronger. We have gained at a stroke one of the best ports in the north, perfectly situated to supply our forces as we push into enemy territory. Before, everything had to come the length of England by cart, over bad roads in bad weather. Now we can bring in supplies and reinforcements by ship and almost straight to the front, and the whole thing managed without a single casualty. West was not about to allow him to steal the credit for that. Absolutely, he droned in an emotionless monotone. Our northern allies have once again proved invaluable. Polder's red-jacketed staff frowned and grumbled. They played a part. The general was forced to admit. Their leader, the Dogman, came to us with the original plan, executed it himself using his own men, and delivered the town to you, its gates open, and its people compliant. That was my understanding. Polder frowned angrily across at Croy, who was now allowing himself the very thinnest of smiles. My men are in possession of the city and are already building up a stockpile of supplies. We have outflanked the enemy and forced him to fall back towards Carlion. That, Colonel West, is surely the issue here, and not precisely who did what. Indeed, cut in Burr, waving one big hand. You have both done great services for your country, but we must now look forward to future successes. General Croy, arrange for work parties to be left behind to complete the repairs to Dunbreck, and a regiment of levies to man the defenses. With a commander that knows his business, please. It would be embarrassing, to say the least, if we were to lose the fortress for a second time. There will be no mistake, snarled Croy at Polder. You can depend on it. The rest of the army can cross the White Flow and form up on the far bank. Then we can begin to press east and northward, towards Carlion, using the harbor at Ufrith to bring in our supplies. We have driven the enemy out of England. Now we must press forward and grind Bethod to his knees. And the marshal twisted a heavy fist into his palm by way of demonstration. My division will be across the river by tomorrow evening, hissed Polder at Croy. And in good order, Burr grimaced. We must move carefully, whatever the closed council say. The last time a Union army crossed the White Flow was when King Casimir invaded the north. I need hardly remind you that he was forced to withdraw in some disarray. Bethod has caught us out before, and will only grow stronger as he falls back into his own territory. We must work together. This is not a competition, gentlemen. The two generals immediately competed with each other to be the one to agree most. West gave a long sigh and rubbed at the bridge of his nose. Chapter 4, The New Man. And so we return. Bayaz frowned towards the city. A bright, white crescent spread out around the glittering bay. Slowly but decisively, it came closer, reaching out and wrapping Jezal in its welcoming embrace. The features grew distinct, green parks peeping out between the houses, white spires thrusting up from the mass of buildings. He could see the towering walls of the Agrient, sunlight glinting from burnished domes above. The house of the Maker loomed high over all, but even that forbidding mass now seemed, somehow, to speak of warmth and safety. He was home. He had survived. It felt like 100 years since he had stood at the stern of a not dissimilar ship, miserable and forlorn, watching Adua slide sadly away into the distance. Over the surging water, the snapping sailcloth, the cries of the seabirds, he began to distinguish the distant rumble of the city. It sounded like the most wonderful music he had ever heard. He closed his eyes and dragged the air in hard through his nostrils. The rotten salt tang of the bay was sweet as honey on his tongue. "One takes it you enjoyed the trip then, Captain?" asked Bayaz with heavy irony. Jezal could only grin. "I'm enjoying the end of it. No need to be downhearted," offered Brother Longfoot. "Sometimes a difficult journey does not deliver its full benefit until long after one returns. The trials are brief, but the wisdom gained lasts a lifetime." The first of the Magi curled his lip. "Travel brings wisdom only to the wise. It renders the ignorant more ignorant than ever. Master Nine Fingers." "Are you determined to return to the north?" Logen took a brief break from frowning at the water. "I've got no reason to stay." He glanced sideways at Ferro, and she glared back. "Why, look at me." Logen shook his head. "Do you know what? I've no fucking idea." If there had been anything vaguely resembling a romance between them, it appeared now to have collapsed irreparably into a sullen dislike. "Well," said Bayaz, raising his brows, "if you are decided." He held his hand out to the Northmen, and Jezal watched them shake. "Give Bethod a kick for me, once you have him under your boot." "That I will, unless he gets me under his." Never easy, kicking upwards. "My thanks for your help, and for your manners. Perhaps you will be my guest again one day, at the library. We will look out at the lake and laugh about our high adventures in the west of the world. I'll hope for it." But Logen hardly looked as if there was much laughter in him, or much hope either. He looked like a man who had run out of choices. In silence, Jezal watched as the ropes were thrown down to the quay and made fast. The long gangplank squealed out to the shore and scraped onto the stones. Bayaz called out to his apprentice, "Master Quay, time for us to disembark!" And the pale young man followed his master down from the ship without a backward glance, Brother Longfoot behind them. "Good luck, then," said Jezal, offering his hand to Logen. "And to you," the Northman grinned, ignored the hand, and folded him in a tight and unpleasant-smelling embrace. They stayed there for a somewhat touching, somewhat embarrassing moment. Then Nine Fingers clapped him on the back and let him go. "Perhaps I'll see you, up there in the north." Jezal's voice was just the slightest bit cracked in spite of all his efforts. "If they send me, maybe, but I think I'll hope not. Like I said, if I was you, I'd find a good woman and leave the killing to those with less sense." "Aye, like me." He looked over at Ferro. "So that's it then, eh, Ferro?" She shrugged her scrawny shoulders and strode off down the gangplank. Logen's face twitched at that. "Right," he muttered at her back. "Nice knowing you." He waggled the stump of his missing finger at Jezal. "Say one thing for Logen, Ninny Fingers, say he's got a touch with the women." Aye, right. Jezal was finding actually leaving strangely difficult. They had been almost constant companions for the last 6 months. To begin with, he had felt nothing but contempt for the man, but now that it came to it, it was like leaving a much-respected older brother. Far worse, in fact, for Jezal had never thought too highly of his actual brothers. So he dithered on the deck, and Logen grinned at him as though he guessed just what he was thinking. "Don't worry, I'll try to get along without you." Jezal managed half a smile. "Just try to remember what I told you, if you get in another fight." "I'd say, unfortunately, that's pretty much a certainty." Then there was really nothing Jezal could do but turn away and clatter down to the shore. pretending that something had blown into his eye on the way. It seemed a long walk to the busy quay, to stand next to Bayaz and Quai, Longfoot, and Ferro. "Master Ninefingers can look after himself, I dare say," said the first of the Magi. "Oh, yes, indeed," chuckled Longfoot. "Few better." Jezal took a last look back over his shoulder as they headed off into the city. Logen raised one hand to him from the rail of the ship, and then the corner of a warehouse came between them, and he was gone. Ferro loitered for a moment, frowning back towards the sea, her fists clenched and a muscle working on the side of her head. Then she turned and saw Jezal watching her. "What are you looking at?" And she pushed past him and followed the others into the swarming streets of Adua. The city was just as Jezal remembered it, and yet everything was different. The buildings seemed to have shrunk and huddled and meanly together. Even the wide middle way, the great central artery of the city, felt horribly squashed after the huge open spaces of the old empire, the awe-inspiring vistas of ruined Alcus. The sky had been higher, out there on the great plain. Here everything was reduced, and, to make matters worse, had an unpleasant smell he had never before noticed. He went with his nose wrinkled, dodging between the buffeting flow of passers-by with bad grace. It was the people that were strangest of all. It had been months since Jezal had seen more than 10 at one time. Now there were suddenly thousands pressed in all around him, furiously intent on their own doings, soft and scrubbed and decked out in gaudy colors, as freakish to him now as circus performers. Fashions had moved on while he was away facing death in the barren west of the world. Hats were worn at a different angle, sleeves had swollen to a wider cut, shirt collars had shriveled to a length that would have been thought preposterously short a year before. Jezal snorted to himself. It seemed bizarre that such nonsense could ever have interested him, and he watched a group of perfumed dandies strutting past with the highest contempt. Their group dwindled as they passed on through the city. First Longfoot made his effusive farewells with much pressing of hands, talk of honors and privileges, and promises of reunion that Jezal suspected, and indeed rather hoped, were insincere. Near the great market square of the Four Corners, Quai was dispatched on some errand or other with all his habitual sullen silence. That left only the first of the Magi as a companion, with Ferro slouching angrily along behind. Being honest, Jezal would not have minded had the group dwindled considerably further. He had long ago given up any hope that Ferro's armor of scowls would crack to reveal a caring soul within, but at least her abysmal temper was predictable. Bayaz, if anything, was an even more unnerving companion. One half grandfatherly good humor, the other half who knew what. Whenever the old man opened his mouth, Jezal flinched in anticipation of some ugly surprise. But he chatted pleasantly enough for the time being. "Might I ask what your plans are now, Captain Luther?" "Well, I suppose I will be sent to England to fight against the Northmen." "I imagine so, although we never know what turns fate may take." Jezal did not much care for the sound of that. "And you? Will you be going back too?" He realized he had not the slightest idea of where the Magus had appeared from in the first place. "Not quite yet. I will remain in Adua for the moment." "Great things are afoot, my boy, great things. Perhaps I will stay to see how they turn out." "Move, bitch," came a yell from the side of the road. 3 members of the city watch had gathered round a dirty-faced girl in a tattered dress. One was leaning down over her with a stick clenched in his fist, shouting in her face while she cringed back. An unhappy-seeming press had gathered to watch, workmen and laborers mostly, scarcely cleaner than the beggar herself. "Why don't you let her be?" one grumbled. One of the watchmen took a warning step at them, raising his stick, while his friend seized hold of the beggar by her shoulder, kicking over a cup in the road, sending a few coins tinkling into the gutter. "That seems excessive," said Jezal under his breath. "Well," Bayaz watched down his nose. "These sort of things happen all the time. Are you telling me you've never seen a beggar moved along before?" Jezal had, of course, often, and had never raised an eyebrow. Beggars could not simply be left to clutter up the streets, after all. And yet, for some reason, the process was making him uncomfortable. The unfortunate waif kicked and cried, and the guardsman dragged her another stride on her back with entirely unnecessary violence, clearly enjoying himself. It was not so much the act itself that Jezal objected to, as that they would do it in front of him without a thought for his feelings. It rendered him somehow complicit. "That is a disgrace," he hissed through gritted teeth. Bayaz shrugged. If it bothers you that much, why not do something about it? The watchman chose that moment to seize the girl by her scruffy hair and give her a sharp blow with his stick, and she squealed and fell, her arms over her head. Jezal felt his face twist. In a moment he had shoved through the crowd and dealt the man a resounding boot to his backside, sending him sprawling in the gutter. One of his companions came forward with his stick out, but stumbled back a moment later. Jezal realized he had his steels drawn, the polished blades glinting in the shadows beside the building. The audience gasped and edged back. Jezal blinked. He had not intended the business to go anything like this far. Damn Bayaz and his idiotic advice. But there was nothing for it now but to carry it through. He assumed his most fearless and arrogant expression. One step further and I'll stick you like the swine you are. He looked from one of the watchmen to the other. Well, do any of you care to test me? He earnestly hoped that none of them did, but he need not have worried. They were predictably cowardly in the face of determined resistance, and loitered just out of range of his steels. No one deals with the watch like that. We'll find you. You can depend on. Finding me will present no difficulty. My name is Captain Luther, of the King's Own. I am resident in the Agrient. You cannot miss it. It is the fortress that dominates the city. And he jabbed up the street with his long steel, making one of the watchmen stumble away in fear. I will receive you at your convenience, and you can explain to my patron, Lord Marshal Varus, your disgraceful behavior towards this woman, a citizen of the Union guilty of no greater crime than being poor. A ludicrously overblown speech, of course. Jezal found himself almost flushing with embarrassment at that last part. He had always despised poor people, and he was far from sure his opinions had fundamentally changed. But he got carried away halfway through, and had no choice but to finish with a flourish. Still, his words had their effect on the city watch. The three men backed away, for some reason grinning as if the whole business had gone just as they planned, leaving Jezal to the unwanted approval of the crowd. Well done, lad. Good thing someone's got some guts. What did he say his name was? Captain Luther, roared Bayaz suddenly, causing Jezal to jerk round halfway through sheathing his steels. Captain Jezal Dan Luther, the winner of last year's contest, just now returned from his adventures in the West. Luther, the name. Luther, did he say? The one who won the contest? That's him. I saw him beat Gorst. The whole crowd was staring, wide-eyed and respectful. One of them reached out, as though to touch the hem of his coat, and Jezal stumbled backwards, almost tripping over the beggar girl who had been the cause of the whole fiasco. Thank you, she gushed, in an ugly commoner's accent rendered still less appealing by her bloody mouth. Oh, thank you, sir. It was nothing. Jezal edged away, deeply uncomfortable. She was extremely dirty, at close quarters, and he had no wish to contract an illness. The attention of the group as a whole was, in fact, anything but pleasant. He continued to shuffle backwards while they watched him, all smiles and admiring mutterings. Ferro was frowning at him as they moved away from the four corners. "Is there something?" he snapped. She shrugged. "You're not as much of a coward as you were. My thanks for that epic praise." He rounded on Bayaz. "What the hell was that? That was you carrying out a charitable act, my boy, and I was proud to see it. It would seem my lessons have not been entirely wasted on you." "I meant," growled Jezal, who felt himself to have gained less than nothing from Bayaz's constant lecturing. "What were you about, proclaiming my name to all and sundry? The story will now spread all over town." "I had not considered that. Helping those less fortunate, the aid of a lady in distress, protecting the weak, and so forth. Admirable, truly," but muttered Jezal, unsure whether he was being taken for a fool. "Here our paths diverge, my young friend." "Ah, they do? Where are you going?" snapped Ferro suspiciously. "I have a few matters to attend to," said the Magus, "and you will be coming with me." "Why would I do that?" She appeared to be in a worse mood even than usual since they left the docks, which was no mean achievement. Bayaz's eyes rolled to the sky. "Because you lack the social graces necessary to function for longer than 5 minutes on your own in such a place as this. Why else? You will be going back to the Agrient, I assume?" he asked Jezal. Yes, of course. Well then, I would like to thank you, Captain Luther. For the part you played in that little adventure of ours. How dare you, you magical arsehole! The entire business was a colossal, painful, disfiguring waste of my time, and a failure to boot. But what Jezal really said was, of course, yes. He took the old man's hand, preparing to give it a limp shake. It has been an honor. Bayaz's grip was shockingly firm. That is good to hear. Jezal found himself drawn very close to the old man's face, staring into his glittering green eyes at unnervingly close quarters. We may have the need to collaborate again. Jezal blinked. Collaborate really was an ugly choice of word. Well then, perhaps I will see you later. Never would have been preferable, in his opinion. But Bayaz only grinned as he let go of Jezal's buzzing fingers. Oh, I feel sure we shall meet again. The sun shone pleasantly through the branches of the aromatic cedar, casting a dappled shade on the ground beneath, just as it used to. A pleasant breeze fluttered through the courtyard, and the birds twittered in the branches of the trees, just as they always had. The old buildings of the barracks had not changed, crowding in, coated with rustling ivy on all sides of the narrow courtyard. But there the similarity to Jezal's happy memories ended. A dusting of moss had crept up the legs of the chairs. The surface of the table had acquired a thick crust of bird droppings. The grass had gone unclipped for weeks on end, and seed heads thrashed at Jezal's calves as he wandered past. The players themselves were long gone. He watched the shadows shifting on the gray wood, remembering the sound of their laughter, the taste of smoke and strong spirits, the feel of the cards in his hand. Here Jalenhorm had sat, playing at being tough and manly. Here Caspa had laughed at jokes at his own expense. Here West had leaned back and shaken his head with resigned disapproval. Here Brent had shuffled nervously at his hand, hoping for big wins that never came. And here had been Jezal's place. He dragged the chair out from the clutching grass, sat down in it with one boot up on the table and rocked it onto its rear legs. It seemed hard to believe now that he had sat here watching and scheming, thinking about how best to make his friends seem small. He told himself he would never have engaged in any such foolishness now. No more than a couple of hands, anyway. If he had thought that a thorough wash, a careful shave, a plucking of bristles, and a long-winded arranging of hair would make him feel at home, he was disappointed. The familiar routines left him feeling like a stranger in his own dusty rooms. It was hard to become excited over the shining of the boots and buttons, or the arrangement of the gold braid just so. When he finally stood before the mirror, where long ago he had whiled away so many delightful hours, he found his reflection decidedly unnerving. A lean and weather-worn adventurer stared bright-eyed from the viscerine glass, his sandy beard doing little to disguise the ugly scar down his bent jaw. His old uniforms were all unpleasantly tight, scratchily starched, chokingly constricted round the collar. He no longer felt like he belonged in them to any degree. He no longer felt like a soldier. He scarcely even knew who he should report to, after all this time away. Every officer he was aware of, more or less, was with the army in England. He supposed he could have sought out Lord Marshal Varus, had he really wanted to, but the fact was he had learned enough about danger now to not want to rush at it. He would do his duty if he was asked, but it would have to find him first. In the meantime, he had other business to attend to. The very thought made him terrified and thrilled at once, and he pushed a finger inside his collar and tugged at it in an effort to relieve the pressure in his throat. It did not work. Still, as Logen Ninefingers had been so very fond of saying, it was better to do it than to live with the fear of it. He picked up his dress sword, but after a minute of staring at the absurd brass scrollwork on the hilt, he tossed it on the floor and kicked it under his bed. Look less than you are, Logen would have said. He retrieved his travel-worn long steel and slid it through the clasp on his belt, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. There was nothing intimidating about the street. It was a quiet part of town, far off from chattering commerce and rumbling industry. In the next road a knife sharpener was throatily proclaiming his trade. Under the eaves of the modest houses a pigeon cuckooed half-heartedly. Somewhere nearby the sound of clopping hooves and crackling carriage wheels rose and faded. Otherwise all was quiet. He had already walked past the house once in each direction, and dared not do so again for fear that Arde would see him through a window, recognize him, and wonder what the hell he was up to. So he made circuits of the upper part of the street, practicing what he would say when she appeared at the door. I am returned. No, too high-blown. Hello, how are you? No, too casual. It's me, Luther. Too stiff. Arde, I've missed you. Too needy. He saw a man frowning at him from an upstairs window, and he coughed and made off quickly towards the house, murmuring to himself over and over, "Better to do it. Better to do it. Better to do it." His fist pounded against the wood. He stood and waited, heart thumping in his teeth. The latch clicked, and Jezal put on his most ingratiating smile. The door opened, and a short, round-faced and highly unattractive girl stared at him from the doorway. There could be no doubt, however things had changed, that she was not R.D. Yes, heir, a servant. How could he have been such a fool as to think R.D. would open her own front door? She was a commoner, not a beggar. He cleared his throat. "I am returned, I mean to say. Does R.D. West live here?" "She does." The maid opened the door far enough for Jezal to step through into the dim hallway. "Who shall I say is calling?" "Captain Luther." Her head snapped round as though it had an invisible string attached to it, and he had given it a sudden jerk. "Captain Jezal Dan Luther." "Yes," he muttered, mystified. Could R.D. have been discussing him with the help? Oh, if you wait." The maid pointed to a doorway and hurried off, eyes wide, quite as if the Emperor of Gurkish had come calling. The dim living room gave the impression of having been decorated by someone with too much money, too little taste, and not nearly enough space for their ambitions. There were several garishly upholstered chairs, an oversized and over-decorated cabinet, and a monumental canvas on one wall, which, had it been any bigger, would have required the room to be knocked through into the neighboring house. Two dusty shafts of light came in through the gaps in the curtains, gleaming on the highly polished, if slightly wonky, surface of an antique table. Each piece might have passed muster on its own, but crowded together the effect was quite suffocating. Still, Jezal told himself as he frowned around at it all, he had come for R.D., not for her furniture. It was ridiculous. His knees were weak. His mouth was dry. His head was spinning, and with every moment that passed it got worse. He had not felt this scared in Olcus, with a crowd of screaming Shanka bearing down on him. He took a nervous circuit of the room, fists clenching and unclenching. He peered out into the quiet street. He leaned over a chair to examine the massive painting. A muscular-seeming king lounged in an outsized crown, while fur-trimmed lords bowed and scraped around his feet. Herod the Great Jezal guessed, but the recognition brought him little joy. Bayaz's favorite and most tiresome topic of conversation had been the achievements of that man. Herod the Great could be pickled in vinegar for all Jezal cared. Herod the Great could go, well. She stood in the doorway, bright light from the hall beyond glowing in her dark hair and down the edges of her white dress, her head on one side, and the faintest ghost of a smile on her shadowy face. She seemed hardly to have changed. So often in life, moments that are long anticipated turn out to be profound disappointments. Seeing R.D. again, after all that time apart, was undoubtedly an exception. All his carefully prepared conversation evaporated in that one instant, leaving him as empty-headed as he had been when he first laid eyes on her. "You're alive, then?" she murmured. "Yes, just about." He managed half an awkward smile. "Did you think I was dead?" "I hoped you were." That wiped the grin off his face with sharp effect, when I didn't get so much as a letter. "But really, I thought you'd just forgotten about me?" Jezal winced. "I'm sorry I didn't write." "Very sorry. I wanted to." She swung the door shut and leaned against it with her hands behind her, frowning at him all the while. "There wasn't a day I didn't want to. But I was called for, and never had the chance to tell anyone, not even my family. I was far away, in the West. I know you were. The whole city is buzzing with it, and if I've heard, it must be common knowledge indeed. You've heard." R.D. jerked her head towards the hall. "I had it from the maid." "From the maid? How the hell could anyone in Adua have heard anything about his misadventures, let alone R.D. West's maid?" He was assailed with sudden unpleasing images. Crowds of servants giggling at the thought of him lying around, crying over his broken face. Everyone who is anyone gossiping about what a fool he must have looked being fed with a spoon by a scarred brute of a Northman. He felt himself blushing to the tips of his ears. "What did she say?" "Oh, you know." She wandered absently into the room. "That you scaled the walls at the siege of Darmium, was it?" opened the gates to the Emperor's men, and so on. What? He was even more baffled than before. Darmian? I mean to say, who told her? She came closer and closer, and he grew more and more flustered until he stammered to a stop. Closer yet, and she was looking slightly upwards into his face with her lips parted. So close that he was sure she was going to take him in her arms and kiss him. So close that he leaned forward slightly in anticipation, half closing his eyes, his lips tingling. Then she passed him, her hair nearly flicking in his face, and went on to the cabinet, opening it and taking out a decanter, leaving him behind, marooned on the carpet. In gormless silence he watched her fill 2 glasses and offer one out, wine slopping and trickling stickily down the side. You've changed. Jezal felt a sudden surge of shame, and his hand jerked up to cover his scarred jaw on an instinct. I don't mean that. Not just that, anyway. Everything. You're different somehow. The effect she had on him was, if anything, stronger now than it used to be. Then there had not been all the weight of expectation, all the long daydreaming and anticipation out in the wilderness. I've missed you. He said it without thinking, then found himself flushing and had to try and change the subject. Have you heard from your brother? He's been writing every week. She threw her head back and drained her glass, started to fill it again. Ever since I found out he was still alive, anyway. What? I thought he was dead for a month or more. He only just escaped from the battle. There was a battle? Squeaked Jezal, just before remembering there was a war on. Of course there had been battles. He brought his voice back under control. What battle? The one where Prince Ladisla was killed. Ladisla's dead, he squealed, voice shooting up into a girlish register again. The few times he had seen the Crown Prince, the man had seemed so self-absorbed as to be indestructible. It was hard to believe he could simply be stabbed with a sword, or shot with an arrow, and die like anyone else. But there it was, and then his brother was murdered. Renault? Murdered. In his bed in the palace. When the king dies, they'll choose a new one by a vote in open council. A vote? His voice rose so high at that he almost felt some sick at the back of his throat. She was already filling her glass again. Uthman's emissary was hanged for the murder, despite most likely being innocent. And so the war with the Gurkish is dragging on. We're at war with the Gurkish as well. Dagoska fell at the start of the year. Dagoska fell? Jezal emptied his glass in one long swallow and stared at the carpet, trying to fit it all into his head. He should not have been surprised, of course, that things had moved on while he was away, but he had hardly expected the world to turn upside down. War with the Gurkish, battles in the north, votes to choose a new king. You need another? You need another, asked Ardea, tilting the decanter in her hand. I think I'd better. Great events, of course, just as Bayaz had said. He watched her pour, frowning down intently, almost angrily, as the wine gurgled out. He saw a little scar on her top lip that he had never noticed before, and he felt a sudden compulsion to touch it and push his fingers in her hair and hold her against him. Great events, but it all seemed of small importance compared to what happened now, in this room. Who knew? The course of his life might turn on the next few moments, if he could find the right words and make himself say them. I really did miss you, he managed, a miserable effort, which she dismissed with a bitter snort. Don't be a fool. He caught her hand, making her look him in the eye. I've been a fool all my life. Not now. There were times, out there on the plain, the only thing that kept me alive was the thought that I might be with you again. Every day I wanted to see you. She did nothing but frown back at him, entirely unmoved. Her failure to melt into his arms was highly frustrating, after all he had been through. Ardea, please. I didn't come here to argue. She scowled at the floor as she threw down another glass. I don't know why you did come here. Because I love you and I want never to be separated from you again. Please, tell me that you will be my wife. He almost said it, but at the last moment he saw her scornful sneer, and he stopped himself. He had entirely forgotten how difficult she could be. I came here to say that I'm sorry. I let you down, I know. I came as soon as I could, but I see that you're not in the mood. I'll come back later. He brushed past her and made for the door, but Ardi got there first, twisted the key in the lock and snatched it out. "You leave me all alone here, without so much as a letter, then when you come back, you want to leave without even a kiss." She took a lurching step at him, and Jezal found himself backing off. "Ardi, you're drunk." She flicked her head with annoyance. "I'm always drunk. Didn't you say you missed me?" "But," he muttered, starting for some reason to feel slightly scared, I thought. "There's your problem, you see. Thinking. You're no good at it." She herded him back against the edge of the table, and he got his sword so badly tangled up with his legs, he had to put a hand down to stop himself falling. "Haven't I been waiting?" she whispered, and her breath on his face was hot and sour-sweet with wine. "Just like you asked me." Her mouth brushed gently against his, and the tip of her tongue slipped out and lapped against his lips, and she made soft gurgling sounds in her throat and pressed herself up against him. He felt her hand slide down onto his groin, rubbing at him gently through his trousers. The feeling was pleasant, of course, and caused an instant stiffening, pleasant in the extreme, but more than slightly worrying. He looked nervously towards the door. "What about the servants?" he croaked. "If they don't like it, they can find another fucking job, can't they? They weren't my idea." "Then huzzah." She twisted her fingers in his hair and dragged his head painfully round so she was speaking right into his face. "Forget about them. You came here for me, didn't you?" "Yes, yes, of course. Say it then." Her hand pressed up hard against his trousers, almost painful, but not quite. "Ah, I came for you. Well, here I am." And her fingers fumbled with his belt and dragged it open. No need to be shy now. He tried to catch her wrist. "Ardi, wait!" Her other hand caught him a stinging slap right across the face and knocked his head sideways, hard enough to make his ears ring. "I've been sitting here for 6 months doing nothing." She hissed in his face, words slightly slurred. "Do you know how bored I've been? And now you're telling me to wait? Fuck yourself." She dug roughly into his trousers and dragged his prick out, rubbing at him with one hand, squeezing at his face with the other while he closed his eyes and gasped shallow breaths into her mouth. Nothing in his mind but her fingers. Her teeth nipped at his lip, almost painful, and then harder. "Ah," he grunted. "Ah." She was decidedly biting him, biting with a will, as though his lip were a piece of gristle to be chewed through. He tried to pull away, but the table was at his back, and she had him fast. The pain was almost as great as the shock, and then, as the biting went on, considerably greater. "Ah!" He grabbed hold of her wrist with one hand and twisted it behind her back, yanked her arm and shoved her down onto the table. He heard her gasp as her face cracked hard against the polished wood. He stood over her, frozen with dismay, his mouth salty with blood. He could see one dark eye through Ardi's tangled hair, expressionless, watching him over her twisted shoulder. The hair moved round her mouth as she breathed, fast. He let go of her wrist, suddenly, saw her arm move, the marks left by his fingers angry pink on her skin. Her hand slid down and took hold of a fistful of her dress and pulled it up, took another fistful and pulled it up, until her skirts were all tangled around her waist and her bare, pale arse was sticking up at him. Well, he might have been a new man, but he was still a man. With each thrust her head tapped against the plaster, and his skin slapped against the backs of her thighs, and his trousers sagged further and further down his legs until his sword hilt was scraping against the carpet. With each thrust, the table made an outraged creaking, louder and louder every time, as though they were fucking over the back of some disapproving old man. With each thrust she made a grunt, and he made a gasp, not of pleasure or pain in particular, but a necessary moving of air in response to vigorous exercise. It was all over with merciful swiftness. So often in life, moments that are long anticipated prove to be a profound disappointment. This was undoubtedly one of those occasions, when he had spent all those interminable hours out on the plain, saddle-sore, and in fear of his life, dreaming of seeing Ardi again. A quick and violent coupling on the table in her tasteless living room had not been quite what he'd had in mind. When they were done, he pushed his wilting prick back inside his trousers, guilty and ashamed, and miserable in the extreme. The sound of his belt buckle clinking made him want to smash his face against the wall. She got up and let her skirts drop and smoothed them down, her face to the floor. He reached for her shoulder. "Ardi," She shook him angrily off and walked away. She tossed something on the floor behind her and it rattled on the carpet. The key to the door. "You can go." "I can what?" "Go, you got what you wanted, didn't you?" He licked disbelieving at his bloody lip. "You think this is what I wanted?" "Nothing but silence. I love you." She gave a kind of cough, as if she was about to be sick, and she slowly shook her head. Why? He wasn't sure he knew. He wasn't sure what he meant or how he felt anymore. He wanted to start again, but he didn't know how. The whole thing was an inexplicable nightmare from which he hoped soon to wake. "What do you mean? Why?" She bent over, fists clenched, and screamed at him. "I'm fucking nothing. Everyone who knows me hates me. My own father hated me." "My own brother." Her voice cracked, and her face screwed up, and her mouth spat with anger and misery. "Everything I touch I ruin. I'm nothing but shit. Why can't you see it?" And she put her hands over her face and turned her back on him, and her shoulders shook. He blinked at her, his own lip trembling. The old Jezal Dan Luthor would most likely have made a quick grab for that key, sprinted from the room and off down the street, never to come back, and counted himself lucky to have got away so easily. The new one thought about it. He thought about it hard, but he had more character than that. Or so he told himself. "I love you." The words tasted like lies in his bloody mouth, but he had gone far too far now to turn back. "I still love you." He crossed the room, and though she tried to push him off, he put his arms around her. Nothing's changed. He pushed his fingers into her hair and held her head against his chest while she cried softly, sobbing snot down the front of his garish uniform. "Nothing's changed," he whispered. But of course it had. Chapter 5. Feeding time. They did not sit so close that it was obvious they were together. Two men who, in the course of their daily business, happened to have placed their arses on the same piece of wood. It was early morning, and although the sun cast a stinging glare in Glokta's eyes and lent the dewy grass, the rustling trees, the shifting water in the park a golden glow, there was still a treacherous nip to the air. Lord Wetterland was evidently an early riser, but then so am I. Nothing encourages a man to leave his bed like being kept awake all night by searing cramps. His lordship reached into a paper bag, drew out a pinch of bread dust between thumb and forefinger, and tossed it at his feet. A mob of self-important ducks had already gathered, and now they fussed at each other furiously in their efforts to get at the crumbs, while the old nobleman watched them, his lined face a slack and emotionless mask. "I am under no illusions, superior," he droned, almost without moving his lips and without looking up at all. "I am not a big enough man to compete in this contest, even should I wish to. But I am big enough to get something from it. I intend to get what I can. Straight to business then for once. No need to talk about the weather, or how the children are, or the relative merits of different-colored ducks. There is no shame in that. I do not think so. I have a family to feed, and it grows by the year. I strongly advise against too many children. That shouldn't be a problem. And then I keep dogs, and they must be fed also, and have great appetites." Wetterland gave a long wheezing sigh, and tossed the birds another pinch of bread. You rise, superior, the more dependents cry at you for scraps. That is a sad fact. You carry a large responsibility, my lord." Glokta grimaced at a spasm in his leg, and cautiously stretched it out until he felt his knee click. "How large, might I ask?" "I have my own vote, of course, and control the votes of 3 other chairs on the Open Council, families tied to my own by bonds of land, of friendship, of marriage, and of long tradition. Such bonds may prove insubstantial in times such as these." "You are certain of those 3? Wetterland turned his cold eyes on Glokta. "I'm no fool, superior." He tossed more crumbs into the grass, and the ducks quacked and pecked and beat at each other with their wings. 4 votes in total, then. No mean share of the great pie. 4 votes in total. Glokta cleared his throat, checked quickly that there was no one within earshot. A girl with a tragic face stared listlessly into the water just down the path. 2 disheveled officers of the King's Own sat on a bench as far away on the other side, holding forth to each other loudly about who had been drunker the night before. Might the tragic girl be listening for Lord Brock? Might the 2 officers report to High Justice Morovia? I see agents everywhere, and it is just as well. There are agents everywhere. He lowered his voice to a whisper. His Eminence would be willing to offer 15,000 marks for each vote. I see. Wetterland's hooded eyes did not so much as twitch. Wetterland's hooded eyes did not so much as twitch. So little meat would scarcely satisfy my dogs. It would leave nothing for my own table. I should tell you that Lord Berezin, in a highly roundabout manner, already offered me 18,000 a vote, as well as an excellent stretch of land that borders my own estates. Dear hunting woods, are you a hunting man's superior? I was. Glokta tapped his ruined leg, but not for some time. Ah, my commiserations. I have always loved the sport, but then Lord Brock came to visit me. How charming for you both. He was good enough to make an offer of 20,000, and a very suitable match of his youngest daughter for my eldest son. You accepted. I told him it was too early to accept anything. I am sure His Eminence could stretch to 21, but that would have to be high. Justice Moravia's man already offered me 25. Harlan Morrow, hissed Glokta through his remaining teeth. Lord Wetterland raised an eyebrow. I believe that was the name. I regret that I can only match that offer at present. I will inform His Eminence of your position. His delight, I am sure, will know no bounds. I look forward to hearing from you, Superior. Wetterland turned back to his ducks and permitted them a few more crumbs, a vague smile hovering round his lips as he watched them tussle with each other. Glokta hobbled painfully up to the ordinary house, in the unexceptional street, something resembling a smile on his face, a moment free of the suffocating company of the great and the good. A moment in which I do not have to lie, or cheat, or watch for a knife in my back. Perhaps I'll even find a room that doesn't still stink of Harlan Morrow. That would be a refreshing. The door opened sharply, even as he raised his fist to knock, and he was left staring into the grinning face of a man wearing the uniform of an officer in the King's Own. It was so unexpected that Glokta did not recognize him at first. Then he felt a surge of dismay. Why, Captain Luther? What a surprise, and a thoroughly unpleasant one. He was considerably changed. Where once he had been boyish and smooth, he had acquired a somewhat angular, even a weather-beaten look. Where once he had carried his chin with an arrogant lift, he now had an almost apologetic tilt to his face. He had grown a beard too, perhaps in an unsuccessful attempt to disguise a vicious-looking scar through his lip and down his jaw, though it has far from rendered him ugly, alas. Inquisitor Glokta, heir. Superior, really? Luther blinked at him for a moment. Well, in that case, the easy smile reappeared, and Glokta was surprised to find himself being shaken warmly by the hand. Congratulations. I would love to chat, but duty calls. I haven't long in the city, you see. Off to the north, and so on, of course. Glokta frowned after him as he stepped jauntily off up the street, with just the one furtive glance over his shoulder as he rounded the corner, leaving only the question of why he was here in the first place. Glokta hobbled through the open door and shut it quietly behind him, although honestly, a young man leaving a young woman's house in the early morning, one scarcely requires His Majesty's Inquisition to solve that particular mystery. Did I not leave more than my share of residences in the early hours after all? Pretending to hope that I wasn't observed, but really rather hoping that I was. He passed through the doorway into the living room. Or was that a different man? Ade West stood with her back to him, and he heard the sound of wine trickling into a glass. Did you forget something? She asked over her shoulder, voice soft and playful. Not a tone I often get to hear women use. Horror, disgust, and the slightest touch of pity are more common. There was a clinking as she put the bottle away. Or did you decide you really couldn't live without another? She had a crooked smile on her face as she turned, but it slid off suddenly when she saw who was standing there. Glokta snorted. Don't worry. I get that reaction from everyone, even myself, every morning when I look into the mirror. If I can even manage to stand up in front of the damn thing. It's not like that, and you know it. I just wasn't expecting you to wander in. We've all had quite the shock this morning, then. You'll never guess who I passed in your hallway. She froze for just a moment, then tossed her head dismissively and slurped wine from her glass. Aren't you going to give me a clue? All right, I will. Glokta winced as he lowered himself into a chair, stretching his aching leg out in front of him. A young officer in the King's Own, no doubt with a scintillating future ahead of him, though we can all hope otherwise. Ardy glared at him over the rim. There are so many officers in the King's Own I can scarcely tell one from another. Really? This one won last year's contest, I believe. I hardly remember who was in the final. Every year is like the last, don't you find? True. Since I competed, it's been straight downhill. But I thought you might remember this particular fellow. Looked as if someone might have hit him in the face since we last met. Quite hard, I would say, though not half as hard as I'd have liked. You're angry with me, she said, but without the appearance of the slightest concern. I'd say disappointed, but what would you expect? I thought you were cleverer than this. Cleverness is no guarantee of sensible behavior. My father used to say so all the time. She finished her wine with a practiced flick of her head. Don't worry. I can look after myself. No, you can't. You've made that abundantly clear. You realize what will happen if people find out? You'll be shunned. What would be the difference? She sneered at him. Perhaps you'll be surprised to learn I get few invitations to the palace now. I barely even qualify as an embarrassment. No one speaks to me, apart from me, of course, but I'm hardly the type of company young women hope for. But I'm hardly the type of company young women hope for. No one cares a shit what I do. If they find out, it will be no worse than they expect from a slattern like me. Damn commoners, no more self-control than animals, don't you know? Anyway, didn't you tell me I could fuck who I pleased? I also told you the less fucking the better. And I suppose that's what you told all your conquests, is it? Glokta grimaced. Not exactly. I coaxed and I pleaded. I threatened and I bullied. Your beauty has wounded me in the heart. I am wretched. I will die without you. Have you no pity? Do you not love me? I did everything short of display the instruments. Then, when I got what I wanted, I tossed them aside and went merrily on to the next with never a backward glance. "Ha," snorted R.D. as though she guessed what he was thinking. Sandan Glokta, giving lectures on the benefits of chastity. Please, how many women did you ruin before the Gurkish ruined you? You were notorious. A muscle began to tremble in his neck, and he worked his shoulder round until he felt it soften. She makes a fair point. Perhaps a soft word with the gentleman in question will do the trick. A soft word, or a hard night with practical frost. Your bed, your business, I suppose, as they say in Styria. How does the great Captain Luthor come to be among the civilians in any case? Doesn't he have Northmen to rout? Who will save England while he's here? He wasn't in England. No? Father find him a nice, out-of-the-way spot, did he? He's been in the old empire or some such. Across the sea to the west and far away. She sighed as though she had heard a great deal about it, and was now thoroughly bored of the subject. Old empire? What the hell was he up to out there? Why don't you ask him? Some journey. He talked a lot about a Northman. Ninefingers or something. Glokta's head jerked up. Ninefingers? Him and some old bald man. A flurry of twitches ran down Glokta's face. Bayaz Arde shrugged and swigged from her glass again, already developing a slight drunken clumsiness to her movements. Bayaz, all we need, with an election coming, is that old liar sticking his hairless head in. Is he here now, in the city? How should I know? Grumbled Arde. Nobody tells me anything. Chapter 6. So much in common. Ferro stalked round the room and scowled. She poured her scorn out into the sweet-smelling air, onto the rustling hangings, over the great windows, and the high balcony beyond them. She sneered at the dark pictures of fat, pale kings, at the shining furniture scattered about the wide floor. She hated this place, with its soft beds and its soft people. She infinitely preferred the dust and thirst of the badlands of Kanta. Life there was hard and hot and brief, but at least it was honest. This union and this city of Adua in particular, and this fortress of the Agrient especially, were all packed to bursting with lies. She felt them on her skin, like an oily stain she could not rub off. And Bayaz was sunk in the very midst of it. He had tricked her into following him across the world for nothing. They had found no ancient weapon to use against the Gurkish. Now he smiled and laughed and whispered secrets with old men who came in sweating from the heat outside, and left sweating even more. She would never have admitted it to anyone else. She despised having to admit it to herself. She missed Nine Fingers, though she had never been able to show it, It had been a reassurance, having someone she could halfway trust. Now she had to look over her own shoulder. All she had for company was the apprentice, and he was worse than nothing. He sat and watched her in silence, his book ignored on the table beside him, watching and smiling without joy, as though he knew something she should have guessed. As though he thought her a fool for not seeing it. That only made her angrier than ever. So she prowled round the room, frowning at everything, her fists clenched and her jaw locked tight. "You should go back to the south, Ferro." She stopped in her tracks and scowled at Quay. He was right, of course. Nothing would have pleased her more than to leave these godless pinks behind forever, and fight the Gurkish with weapons she understood, tear vengeance from them with her teeth, if she had to. He was right, but that changed nothing. Ferro had never been much for taking advice. "What do you know about what I should do? Scrawny pink fool, more than you think." He did not take his slow eyes away from her for a moment. "We are much alike, you and I. You may not see it, and yet we are so much in common." Ferro frowned. She did not know what the sickly idiot meant by that, but she did not like the sound of it. "Bayaz will bring you nothing you need. He cannot be trusted. I found out too late, but you still have time. You should find another master." "I have no master," she snapped at him. "I am free." One corner of Quay's pale lips twitched up. "Neither of us will ever be free. Go." "There is nothing for you here." "Why do you stay then?" "For vengeance." Ferro frowned deeper. "Vengeance for what?" The apprentice leaned forward, his bright eyes fixed on hers. The door creaked open and he snapped his mouth shut, sat back and looked out of the window, just as if he had never meant to speak. "Damn apprentice with his damn riddles." Ferro turned her scowl towards the door. Bayaz came slowly through into the room, a teacup held carefully level in one hand. He did not so much as look in Ferro's direction as he swept past and out the open door onto the balcony. "Damn Magus!" She stalked after, narrowing her eyes at the glare. They were high up, and the agreement was spread out before them, as it had been when she and Nine Fingers climbed over the rooftops long ago. Groups of idle pinks lazed on the shining grass below, just as they had done before Ferro left for the old empire. And yet not everything was the same. Everywhere in the city, now, there was a kind of fear. She could see it in each soft, pale face, in their every word and gesture, a breathless expectation, like the air before the storm breaks. Like a field of dry grass, ready to burst into flame at the slightest spark. She did not know what they were waiting for, and she did not care. But she had heard a lot of talk about votes. The first of the Magi watched her as she stepped through the door, the bright sun shining on the side of his bald head. Ferro hated tea, and Bayaz knew it. Tea was what the Gurkish drank when they had treachery in mind. She remembered the soldiers drinking it while she struggled in the dust. She remembered the slavers drinking it while they talked prices. She remembered Uthman drinking it while he chuckled at her rage and her helplessness. Now Bayaz drank it, little cup held daintily between his thick thumb and forefinger, and he smiled. Ferro ground her teeth. "I am done here, Pink. You promised me vengeance and have given me nothing. I am going back to the south." "Indeed. We would be sorry to lose you. But Gurkul and the Union are at war. There are no ships sailing to Kanta at present. There may not be for some time to come. Then how will I get there? You have made it abundantly clear that you are not my responsibility. I have put a roof over your head and you show scant gratitude. If you wish to leave, you can make your own arrangements. My brother Yulwei should return to us shortly. Perhaps he will be prepared to take you under his wing." "Not good enough." Bayaz glared at her. A fearsome look, perhaps, but Ferro was not Longfoot, or Luther, or Quay. She had no master, and would never have another. "Not good enough," I said. "Why is it that you insist on testing the limits of my patience? It is not without an end, you know. Neither is mine," Bayaz snorted. "Yours scarcely even has a beginning, as Master Nine Fingers could no doubt testify." "I do declare, Ferro, you have all the charm of a goat, and a mean-tempered goat at that." He stuck his lips out, tipped up his cup and sucked delicately from the rim. Only with a mighty effort was Ferro able to stop herself from slapping it out of his hand and butting the bald bastard in the face into the bargain. But if fighting the Gurkish is still what you have in mind always, then I am sure that I can still find a use for your talents. Something that does not require a sense of humor. My purposes with regard to the Gurkish are unchanged. The struggle must continue, albeit with other weapons. His eyes slid sideways towards the great tower that loomed up over the fortress. Ferro knew little about beauty and cared still less, but that building was a beautiful thing to her mind. There was no softness, no indulgence in that mountain of naked stone. There was a brutal honesty in its shape, a merciless precision in its sharp, black angles. Something about it fascinated her. "What is that place?" she asked. Bayaz narrowed his eyes at her. "The house of the Maker. What is inside? None of your business." Ferro almost spat with annoyance. "You lived there. You served Canidius. You helped the Maker with his works. You told us all this out on the plains. So tell me, what is inside?" "You have a sharp memory, Ferro, but you forget one thing. We did not find the seed. I do not need you. I do not need in particular to answer your endless questions any longer. Imagine my dismay." He sucked primly at his tea again, raising his brows and peering out at the lazy pinks in the park. Ferro forced a smile onto her own face, or as close as she could get to a smile. She bared her teeth at least. She remembered well enough what the bitter old woman Corneille had said, and how much it had annoyed him. She would do the same. The Maker. You tried to steal his secrets. You tried to steal his daughter. Ptolemy was her name. Her father threw her from the roof, in return for her betrayal, in opening his gates to you. Am I wrong? Bayaz angrily flicked the last drops from his cup over the balcony. Ferro watched them glitter in the bright sun, tumbling downwards. Yes, Ferro, the Maker threw his daughter from the roof. It would seem that we are both unlucky in love, eh? Bad luck for us. Worse luck for our lovers. Who would have dreamed we have so much in common? Ferro wondered about shoving the pink bastard off the balcony after his tea, but he still owed her, and she meant to collect. So she only scowled and ducked back through the doorway. There was a new arrival in the room, a man with curly hair and a wide smile. He had a tall staff in his hand, a case of weathered leather over one shoulder. There was something strange about his eyes unlight, one dark. There was something about his watchful gaze that made Ferro suspicious, even more than usual. Ah, the famous Ferro Logen. Forgive my curiosity, but it is not every day that one encounters a person of your remarkable ancestry. Ferro did not like that he knew her name, or her ancestry, or anything about her. Who are you? Where are my manners? I am Yoru Sulfur, of the Order of Magi. And he offered his hand. She did not take it, but he only smiled. Not one of the original 12, of course. Not I. Merely an afterthought. A late addition. I was once apprentice to great Bayaz, Ferro snorted. That hardly qualified him for trust in her estimation. What happened? I graduated. Bayaz tossed his cup down, rattling on a table by the window. Yoru, he said, and the newcomer humbly bowed his head. My thanks for your work thus far. Precise and to the point as always. Sulphur's smile grew broader, a small cog in a large machine. Master Bayaz, but I try to be a sturdy one. You have yet to let me down. I do not forget that. How is your next little game progressing? Ready to begin at your command. Let us begin now. There is nothing to be gained by delay. I shall make the preparations. I have also brought this, as you asked. He swung the bag down from his shoulder and gingerly reached inside. He slowly drew out a book, large and black, its heavy covers hacked and scarred and charred by fire. Glastrad's book, he murmured softly, as though afraid to say the words. Bayaz frowned. Keep it for now. There was an unexpected complication. A complication. Sulphur slid the book back into its case with some relief. What we sought was not there. Then, as regards our other plans, nothing has changed. Of course. Sulphur bowed his head again. Lord Isher will already be on his way. Very well. Bayaz glanced over at Ferro, as though he had only just remembered that she was there. For the time being, perhaps you would be good enough to give us the room. I have a visitor that I must attend to. She was happy to leave, but she took her time moving, if only because Bayaz wanted her gone quickly. She unfolded her arms, stood on the spot, and stretched. She strolled to the door by a roundabout route, letting her feet scuff against the boards and fill the room with their ugly scraping. She stopped on the way to gaze at a picture, to poke at a chair, to flick at a shiny pot, none of which interested her at all. All the while Quai watched, and Bayaz frowned, and Sulphur grinned his knowing little grin. She stopped in the doorway. "Now?" "Yes, now," snapped Bayaz. She looked round the room one more time. "Fucking magi," she snorted, and slid through the door. She almost walked into a tall old pink in the room beyond. He wore a heavy robe, even in the heat, and had a sparkling chain around his shoulders. A big man loomed behind him, grim and watchful, a guard. Ferro did not like the old pink's look. He stared down his nose at her, chin tilted up, as though she were a dog, as though she were a slave. "SSS," she hissed in his face as she shouldered past him. He gave an outraged snort, and his guard gave Ferro a hard look. She ignored it. Hard looks mean nothing. If he wanted her knee in his face, he could try and touch her. But he did not. The two of them went in through the door. "Ah, Lord Isher," she heard Bayaz saying just before it shut. "I'm delighted that you could visit us at short notice. I came at once. My grandfather always said that your grandfather was a wise man and a good friend. I would like to discuss with you, if I may, the situation in the open council. Will you take tea?" Chapter 7. Honesty. Jezal lay on his back, his hands behind his head, the sheets around his waist. He watched RD looking out of the window, her elbows on the sill, her chin on her hands. He watched RD, and he thanked the fates that some long-forgotten designer of military apparel had seen fit to provide the officers of the King's Own with a high-waisted jacket. He thanked them with a deep and earnest gratitude, because his jacket was all she was wearing. It was amazing how things had changed between them since that bitter, bewildering reunion. For a week they had not spent a night apart, and for a week the smile had barely left his face. Occasionally the memory would wallow up, of course, unbidden and horribly surprising, like a bloated corpse bobbing to the surface of the pond while one enjoys a picnic on the shore, of RD biting and hitting him, crying and screaming in his face. But when it did so, he would fix his grin and see her smile at him. And soon enough he would be able to shove those unpleasant thoughts back down again, at least for now. Then he would congratulate himself on being a big enough man to do it, and on giving her the benefit of the doubt. "RD," he wheedled at her. "Come back to bed. Why? Because I love you." Strange how the more he said it, the easier it became. She gave a bored sigh. "So you keep saying, it's true." She turned round, hands on the sill behind, her body a dark outline against the bright window. "And what does that mean, exactly? That you've been fucking me for a week and you haven't had enough yet? I don't think I'll ever get enough." "Well," and she pushed herself away from the window and padded across the boards. "I don't suppose there's any harm in finding out, is there? No more harm, anyway." She stopped at the foot of the bed. "Just promise me one thing." Jezal swallowed, worried at what she might ask him, worried at what he might say in reply. "Anything," he murmured, forcing himself to smile. "Don't let me down." His smile grew easier. That was not so hard to say yes to. He was a changed man, after all. "Of course, I promise." "Good." She crept up onto the bed, on her hands and knees, eyes fixed on his face while he wriggled his toes in anticipation under the sheet. She knelt up, one leg on either side of him, and jerked the jacket smooth across her chest. "Well then, Captain, do I pass muster, I would say." And he grabbed the front of the jacket and pulled her down on top of him, slipped his hands inside it. "That you are without a doubt," and he slid his hand under her breast and rubbed at her nipple with his thumb, "the finest-looking soldier in my company." She pressed her groin against his through the sheet and worked her hips back and forward. "Ah, the captain is already at attention. For you?" Constantly. Her mouth licked and sucked at his, smearing spit on his face, and he pushed his hand between her legs, and she rubbed herself against it for a while, his sticky fingers squelching in and out of her. She grunted and sighed in her throat, and he did the same. She reached down and dragged the sheet out of the way. He took hold of his prick, and she wriggled her hips until they found the right spot and worked her way down onto him, her hair tickling at his face, her rasping breath tickling at his ear. There were 2 heavy knocks at the door, and they both froze. Another 2 knocks. R.D. put her head up, pushing her hair out of her flushed face. "What is it?" she called, voice thick and throaty. "There's someone for the captain, the maid." Is he still here?" R.D.'s eyes rolled down to Jezal's. "I dare say I could get a message to him." He bit on his lip to stifle a laugh, reached up and pinched at her nipple, and she slapped his hand away. "Who is it?" "A night herald." Jezal felt his smile fading. Those bastards never seemed to bring good news, and always at the worst possible times. "Lord Marshal Varus needs to speak to the captain urgently. They're all over town looking for him." Jezal cursed under his breath. It seemed that the army had finally realized he was back. "Tell him that when I see the captain I will let him know," shouted R.D., and the sound of footsteps retreated down the corridor outside. "Fuck!" Jezal hissed as soon as he was sure the maid was gone, not that she could have been in too much doubt about what had been going on for the past few days and nights. "I'll have to go? Now? No. Curse them. If I don't, they'll just keep looking, and the sooner I go, the sooner I can get back." She sighed and rolled over onto her back while he slithered off the bed and started hunting round the room for his scattered clothes. His shirt had a wine stain down the front. His trousers were creased and rumpled, but they would have to do. Cutting the perfect figure was no longer his one goal in life. He sat down on the bed to pull his boots on, and he felt her kneel behind him, her hands sliding across his chest, her lips brushing at his ear as she whispered to him. "So you'll be leaving me all alone again, will you? Heading off to England to slaughter Northmen with my brother?" Jezal leaned down with some difficulty and heaved one boot on. Perhaps, perhaps not. The idea of the soldiering life no longer inspired him. He had seen enough of violence, close up, to know it was extremely frightening and hurt like hell. Glory and fame seemed like meager rewards for all the risks involved. "I'm giving serious thought to the idea of resigning my commission." "You are? And doing what?" "I'm not sure." He turned his head and raised an eyebrow at her. "Maybe I'll find a good woman and settle down." "A good woman? Do you know any? I was hoping you might have some suggestions." She pressed her lips together. "Let me think. Does she have to be beautiful?" No, beautiful women are always so bloody demanding. Plain as ditchwater, please." "Clever," Jezal snorted. "Anything but that." "I am notorious for my empty-headedness. A clever woman would only make me look the dunce the whole time." He dragged the other boot on, peeled her hands away and stood up. A wide-eyed and thoughtless calf would be ideal. Someone to endlessly agree with me. R.D. clapped her hands. "Oh yes, I can see her on you now, trailing from your arm like an empty dress, a kind of echo at a higher pitch. Noble blood, though, I imagine." "Of course, nothing but the best. One point on which I could never compromise. And fair hair, I have a weakness for it." "Oh, I entirely agree. Dark hair is so commonplace, so very much the color of dirt and filth and muck," she shuddered. "Above all," as he pushed his sword through the clasp on his belt, a calm and even temper, "I have had my fill of surprises. Naturally, life is difficult enough without a woman making trouble." "So terribly undignified." She raised her eyebrows. "I will think through my acquaintances." "Excellent. In the meantime, and although you wear it with far greater dash than I ever could, I will need my jacket." "Oh yes, sir." She pulled it off and flung it at him, then stretched out on the bed, stark naked, back arched, hands above her head, wriggling her hips slowly back and forth, one knee in the air, the other leg stretched out, big toe pointing at him. "You aren't going to leave me alone for too long, though, are you?" He watched her for a moment. "Don't you dare move a fucking inch," he croaked. Then he pulled the jacket on, wedged his prick between his thighs, and waddled out the door, bent over. He hoped it would go down before he had his briefing with the Lord Marshal, but he was not entirely sure it would. Once again, Jezal found himself in one of High Justice Morovia's cavernous chambers, standing all alone on the empty floor, facing the enormous polished table, while 3 old men regarded him grimly from the other side. As the clerk shut the high doors with an echoing boom, he had a deeply worrying sense of having lived through this very experience before. The day he had been summoned from the boat for England, torn from his friends and his ambitions, to be sent on a madcap, doomed journey into the middle of nowhere. A journey that had cost him some of his looks and nearly his life. It was safe to say that he did not entirely relish being back here, and hoped most fervently for a better outcome. From that point of view, the absence of the first of the Magi was something of a tonic, even if the panel was otherwise far from comforting. Facing him were the hard old faces of Lord Marshal Varus, High Justice Morovia, and Lord Chamberlain Hoff. Varus was busy waxing on about Jezal's fine achievements in the old empire. He had evidently heard a very different version of events from the one that Jezal himself remembered. Great adventures in the West, as I understand it, bringing honor to the Union on foreign fields. I was particularly impressed by the story of your charge across the bridge at Damium. Did that really happen the way I have been told? Across the bridge? Sir, well, truthfully, he should probably have asked the old fool what the hell he was talking about. But he was far too busy thinking of RD, stretched out naked. Shit on his country. Duty be damned. He could resign his commission now and be back in her bed before the hour was out. The thing is, that was your favorite, was it? Asked Hoff, lowering his goblet. It was the one about the Emperor's daughter that most caught my fancy. And he looked at Jezal with a twinkle in his eye that implied a story of a saucy tone. Honestly, Your Grace, I have not the slightest idea how that rumor began. Nothing of the kind occurred, I assure you. The whole business appears somehow to have become greatly exaggerated. Well, one glorious rumor is worth 10 disappointing truths. Would you not agree? Jezal blinked. Well, yeah, I suppose. In any case, cut in Varus, the closed council have received excellent reports of your conduct while abroad. They have, many and various reports, and all glowing. Jezal could not help grinning, though he had to wonder from whom such reports might have come. He could scarcely imagine Pharaoh Maljin gushing about his fine qualities. Well, your lordships are very kind, but I must, as a result of your dedication and courage in this difficult and vital task, I am delighted to announce that you have been elevated to the rank of colonel with immediate effect. Jezal's eyes opened up very wide. I have? You have indeed, my boy, and no one could deserve it more. To rise 2 ranks in one afternoon was an unprecedented honor, especially when he had fought in no battle, carried out no recent deeds of valor, and made no ultimate sacrifices, unless you counted leaving off the most recent bedding of his best friend's sister halfway. A sacrifice, no doubt, but scarcely the kind that usually earned the king's favor. He could not escape a glow of satisfaction. A new uniform, and more braid, and so forth, and more people to tell what to do. Glory and fame were meager rewards, perhaps, but he had taken the risks already, and now had only to say yes. Had he not suffered? Had he not earned it? He did not have to think about it for so very long. He scarcely had to think about it at all. The idea of leaving the army and settling down receded rapidly into the far distance. I would be entirely honored to accept this exceptional heir honor. Then we are all equally delighted, said Hoff sourly. Now to business. You are aware, Colonel Luther, that there has been some trouble with the peasants of late. Surprisingly, no news had reached RD's bedroom. Nothing serious, surely, Your Grace. Not unless you call a full-blown revolt serious. Revolt? Jezal swallowed. This man, the tanner, spat the Lord Chamberlain. He has been touring the countryside for months, whipping up dissatisfaction, sowing the seeds of disobedience, inciting the peasantry to crimes against their masters, against their lords, against their king. No one ever suspected it would reach the point of open rebellion. Varus worked his mouth angrily. But following a demonstration near Keln, a group of peasants, encouraged by this tanner, armed themselves and refused to disband. They won a victory over the local landowner, and the insurrection spread. Now we hear they crushed a significant force under Lord Finster yesterday, burned his manor house and hung 3 tax collectors. They are in the process of ravaging the countryside in the direction of Adua. Ravaging? Murmured Jezal, glancing at the door. Ravaging really was a very ugly word. It is a most regrettable business, bemoaned Morovia. Half of them are honest men, faithful to their king, pushed to this through the greed of their landlords. Varus sneered his disgust. There can be no excuse for treason. The other half are thieves, and blackguards and malcontents. They should be whipped to the gallows. The closed council has made its decision. Cut in half. This tanner has declared his intention to present a list of demands to the king. To the king. New freedoms, new rights. Every man the equal of his brother and other such dangerous nonsense. Soon it will become known that they are on their way, and there will be panic. Riots in support of the peasants, and riots against them. Things are balanced on a knife edge already. 2 wars in progress and the king in fading health, with no heir. Hoff bashed at the table with his fist, making Jezal jump. They must not be allowed to reach the city. Marshal Varus clasped his hands before him. The 2 regiments of the king's own that have remained in Midderland will be sent out to counter this threat. A list of concessions, and he scowled as he said the word, has been prepared. If the peasants will accept negotiation and return to their homes, their lives can be spared. If this tanner will not see reason, then his so-called army must be destroyed, scattered, broken up. Killed, said Hoff, rubbing at a stain on the table with his heavy thumb. And the ringleaders delivered to His Majesty's Inquisition. Regrettable, murmured Jezal without thinking, feeling a cold shiver at the very mention of that institution. Necessary, said Morovia, sadly shaking his head, but hardly straightforward. Varus frowned at Jezal across the table. In each village, in each town, in every field and farm they have passed through, they have picked up more recruits. The country is alive with malcontents, ill-disciplined, of course, and ill-equipped. But at our last estimate, they numbered some 40,000. 40,000. Jezal shifted his weight nervously. He had supposed they were perhaps discussing a few hundred, and those without proper footwear. There was no danger here, of course, safe behind the walls of the Agrient, the walls of the city. But 40,000 was an awful lot of very angry men. Even if they were peasants, the king's own are making their preparations, 1 regiment of horse and 1 of foot. All that is missing now is a commander for the expedition. Ha! Grunted Jezal. He did not begrudge that unfortunate man his position, commanding a force outnumbered 5 to 1 against a bunch of savages buoyed up by righteousness and petty victories, drunk on hatred of noblemen and monarchy, thirsty for blood and loot. Jezal's eyes went wider still. Me, you, he fumbled for the words. I do not wish to seem ungrateful, you understand, but surely, I mean to say, there must be men better suited to the task. Lord Marshal, you yourself have. This is a complicated time. Hoff glared sternly at Jezal from beneath his bushy brows. A very complicated time. We need someone without affiliations. We need someone with a clean slate. You fit the bill admirably. But negotiating with peasants, your grace, your worship, Lord Marshal, I have no understanding of the issues. I have no understanding of law. We are not blind to your deficiencies, said Hoff. That is why there will be a representative from the closed council with you, someone who possesses unchallenged expertise in all those areas. A heavy hand slapped suddenly down on Jezal's shoulder. Jezal slowly turned his head. A feeling of terrible dismay boiling up from his stomach. And there was the first of the Magi, grinning into his face from a distance of no more than a foot. Very much present, after all. It was no surprise, really, that the bald old meddler was involved in this. Strange and painful events seemed to follow in his wake like stray dogs barking behind the butcher's wagon. The peasants' army, if we can call it such, is camped within 4 days' slovenly march of the city, spread out across the country, seeking for forage. Varus craned forward, poking at the table with a finger. You will proceed immediately to intercept them. Our hopes hang on this, Colonel Luthar. Do you understand your orders? Yes, sir, he whispered, trying and utterly failing to sound enthusiastic. The 2 of us, back together. Bayaz chuckled. They'd better run, eh, my boy? Of course, murmured Jezal miserably. He had had his own chance to escape, his chance to start a new life, and he had given it up in return for an extra star or 2 on his jacket. Too late he realized his awful blunder. Bayaz's grip tightened round his shoulder, drew him to a fatherly distance, and did not feel like releasing him. There really was no way out. Jezal stepped out of the door to his quarters, in a great hurry, cursing as he dragged his box behind him. It really was an awful imposition that he had been obliged to carry his own luggage, But time was extremely pressing if he was to save the Union from the madness of its own people. He had given only the briefest consideration to the idea of sprinting for the docks and taking passage on the first ship to distant Soljuk, before angrily dismissing it. He had taken the promotion with his eyes open, and now he supposed he had no choice but to see it through. Better to do it than to live with the fear of it, and so forth. He twisted his key in the lock, turned around, and recoiled with a girlish gasp of shock. There was someone in the shadows opposite his door, and the feeling of horror only worsened when he realized who it was. The crippled Glokta stood against the wall, leaning heavily on his cane, and grinning his repulsive toothless grin. "A word, Colonel Luthar. If you are referring to this business with the peasants, it is well in hand." Jezal was unable to keep the sneer of disgust entirely off his face. "You need not trouble yourself on that. I am not referring to that business." "Then what?" "Arde West." The corridor seemed suddenly very empty, very quiet. The soldiers, the officers, the servants, all away in England. There were just the two of them, for all Jezal knew, in the entire barracks. "I fail to see how that is any concern of her brother. Our mutual friend Colum West, you do remember him. Worried-looking fellow, losing his hair. Bit of a temper." Jezal felt a guilty flush across his face. He remembered the man well enough, of course, and his temper in particular. "He came to me shortly before departing for the war in England. He asked me to look to his sister's welfare while he was away, risking his life. I promised to do so." Glokta shuffled slightly closer, and Jezal's flesh crept. "A responsibility which, I assure you, I take as seriously as any task the Archlector might choose to give me." "I see," croaked Jezal. That certainly explained the cripple's presence at her house the other day, which had until then been causing him some confusion. He felt no easier in his mind, however, considerably less, in fact. "I hardly think that Colum West would be best pleased with what has been transpiring these last few days. Do you?" Jezal shifted guiltily from one foot to the other. "I admit that I have visited her." "Your visits," whispered the cripple, "are not good for that girl's reputation. We are left with three options. Firstly, and this is my personal favorite, you walk away, and you pretend you never met her, and you never see her again." "Unacceptable," Jezal found himself saying, his voice surprisingly brash. "Secondly, then, you marry the lady and all's forgotten." Of course that was what Jezal was considering, but he was damned if he'd be bullied into it by this twisted remnant of a man. "And third," he inquired with what he felt was fitting contempt. "Third?" A particularly disgusting flurry of twitches crawled up the side of Glokta's wasted face. "I don't think you want to know too much about number 3. Let us only say that it will include a long night of passion with a furnace and a set of razors, and an even longer morning involving a sack, an anvil, and the bottom of the canal." Before he knew what he was doing, Jezal had taken a step forward, forcing Glokta to rock back, wincing against the wall. "I do not have to explain myself to you. My visits are between me and the lady in question. But for your information, I long ago resolved to marry her, and am merely waiting for the right moment." Jezal stood there in the darkness, hardly able to believe what he had heard himself say. Damn his mouth, it still landed him in all manner of trouble. Glokta's narrow left eye blinked. "Ah, lucky her." Jezal found himself moving forward again, almost butting the cripple in the face and crushing him helpless against the wall. "That's right, so you can shove your threats up your crippled arse?" Even squashed against the wall, Glokta's surprise only lasted an instant. Then he leered his toothless grin, his eyelid fluttering and a long tear running down his gaunt cheek. "Why, Colonel Luthar, it is difficult for me to concentrate with you so very close." He stroked the front of Jezal's uniform with the back of his hand. "Especially given your unexpected interest in my arse." Jezal jerked back, mouth sour with disgust. "It seems that Bayaz succeeded where Varuz failed, eh? He taught you where your spine is. My congratulations on your forthcoming wedding. But I think I'll keep my razors handy, just in case you don't follow through. I'm so glad we had this chance to talk." And Glokta limped off towards the stairs, his cane tapping on the boards, his left boot scraping along behind. "As am I," shouted Jezal after him. But nothing could have been further from the truth. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.